We are live.
All right, thanks, Mr. Frederickson. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our June Joint Committee meeting. I'm Dr. Frazier, Superintendent, and with us this evening, of course, is our full board, our full cabinet. And we also have with us this evening to help us present Mr. John Harlan, Principal of Sewell Finestone Elementary, and Mr. Joe McClay, Principal of Holland Elementary. We certainly have a full and important agenda this evening. We're going to work our way through Education Committee, then Facilities, and then we will finish with Finance Committee. The Finance Committee discussion will include a final 2020-21 budget recommendation from the administration to the board. Now, beginning with Education Committee, we've been working with a large committee of teachers, curriculum coordinators, and administrators to build a revised schedule at the elementary level. I asked Mr. Sanko, Director of K-12 Education, to lead this work, and he has certainly done so in very fine fashion. It does deserve mention that the timeline for this work was severely disrupted by the closure of schools in mid-March. In fact, the committee's first formal meeting was set to take place on March 12th, and that meeting needed to be postponed because of COVID-19. And in fact, unbeknownst to us at that time, March 12th ended up being the final day of in-person instruction for the school year. So from that point forward, our full attention turned first to building and then implementing a distance learning program, and public education as we've known it has obviously been turned upside down ever since. I say this to indicate that June wouldn't typically be the month when we would bring a proposed schedule change before the board and before the community. But this year is different, as we all know, in so many incredible ways. The elementary schedule being proposed this evening is good for our students. It prioritizes student wellness, and it prioritizes literacy and numeracy. From an elementary education standpoint, numeracy and literacy, reading, writing, speaking, listening, must be the backbone of the academic program in any school district. In this schedule, you'll see that literacy and numeracy, or what in school we call English language arts and mathematics, are appropriately prioritized. A 21st century education requires an emphasis on 21st century skills, knowing how to access and gather information, being able to process that information, analyze it, synthesize it, and ultimately knowing how to apply that information for the greater good, such as problem solving. That's what this schedule accomplishes. There's nothing radical in this schedule at all. In fact, this proposed schedule, and this is important, this proposed schedule aligns much more closely with the elementary schedules from the highest performing school districts throughout the Delaware Valley. And we'll share some of that information with you this evening. After presenting this evening, we will be sending an informational letter to all elementary parents tomorrow morning. And in doing so, we'll invite feedback over the next week before this proposed schedule becomes a voting item on the board agenda 1 week from tonight. As we've done in the past at our joint committee meetings, we are asking that the board waits until the entire presentations have been made, at which time Mr. Tate and the other committee chairpersons will facilitate board discussion. Also, I want to note that all public comment this evening will be read aloud after we make our way through all three of the committee presentations. And with that, it's my pleasure to kick off our Education Committee presentation surrounding the elementary schedule by introducing Mr. Andy Sanko. Mr. Sanko.
Thanks, Dr. Frazier. Good evening, Mr. Tate, Board of School Directors, Cabinet, and community. As Dr. Frazier said, we will be walking you through our work in what we've done to look at the elementary schedule. We comprise the committee of 40 people made up of 21 teachers from all arms of the district, each of the 10 elementary school principals, 6 curriculum coordinators, Dr. Lambert, Dr. Elliott, and myself, and formed a committee. It's important to note at the front end of this presentation that, to repeat what Dr. Frazier said, you will hear through this presentation from myself, Dr. Elliott, Dr. Lambert, Mr. Harlan, and Mr. McClay. As we began this work, it came to us in November. And from the inception of the conversation, we started looking at benchmarking other districts in terms of instructional minutes. And what's important to note about the instructional minutes, we know there are a finite number of instructional minutes in any given school day at the elementary level. That number is 390 minutes. And we also know that there are non-negotiables. So from those 390 minutes where our starting point was, we know that 30 of those minutes are allocated for lunch, 30 minutes allocated for recess, 15 additional minutes for recess in grades 1, 2, and 3, and of course, 4 specials a week, art, music, phys ed, and library, 45 minutes. We also knew walking into this work and analyzing what we are doing and what other districts are doing, we knew that we had to prioritize competing interest and knew that there would be some trade-offs along the way. When we polled the committee, we talked about priorities. And because we knew that everything is a priority, we wanted to rank the priorities. And once again, there were competing priorities, as there always are. The committee of 40 people spoke and their voice was heard in determining the top 4 priorities from the list of 10 or 11 that we developed. By far, student wellness was the top priority, with 87.5% of the people ranking it as the top priority. Numeracy and literacy fell to the second spot with nearly 72% in focusing on the math instructional minutes as well as the language arts instructional minutes. The third highest ranking priority was a 5th special at the elementary level. We did model that out and understand that a 5th special, a STEAM special, would cost us $1.6 million and require us to employ 7.6 additional teachers. We knew that in the financial landscape that we would have to put the STEAM 5th special idea in the parking lot for a while until we could get a better understanding of the financial situation. I think I speak for the entire committee and probably beyond that we all want a 5th special and we all want that 5th special to be STEAM. The 4th priority was maintaining teacher collaboration and PLC time. As Dr. Fraser mentioned, we started this work when the conversation ensued in November. Between November and March, we did benchmarking and compared our instructional minutes to the instructional minutes of other high-performing school districts across Bucks and Montgomery and some other counties. And you'll hear more about that later on in the presentation. That group of 40 people was scheduled to meet on March 12th. March 12th was the day, if you recall, that we had to close Sulfinestone Elementary early, and then we did not return to school formally after that March 12th date due to COVID. Though we closed schools, we still continued our work and then formally convened as a committee of 40 to discuss the elementary master schedule on May 4th and May 11th. We also had a meeting with all of the curriculum coordinators and the elementary principals who represent a large chunk of the district leadership team. We also met to finalize this proposal on May 22nd. And along the way, we sought the opinions and heard the voices of every member of that committee and collected data to support our work and also continually drive us back toward the goals that we had established that I shared with you on the previous slide. The goals that we identified, again, and these are in rank order based on what I shared with you a few slides ago, was student wellness. And we feel the importance of student wellness is more important now than ever, given that it's our priority and number one goal in our strategic plan. We also, again, I think I speak for the committee in stating that student wellness is important given the circumstances we're under now and not fully understanding how and what we will go back to when we resume school as we normally know it. The second goal is the importance of literacy and numeracy instruction. And of those 390 instructional minutes, less the recess and the specials and the lunch, this group felt that math instruction and language arts instruction was one of the highest ranking priorities. And then the third bullet point, again, to repeat what I shared in a previous slide, teacher collaboration and allowing time for intervention and enrichment for all of our students fell as the third highest ranking priority. And in our work, we continued to work back to those three focal points. When we continued to do this work, it became clear that there would be some changes necessary to meet our priorities. And one of those priorities was to maintain daily time for student wellness. Another priority was that of numeracy, and we wanted to increase the numbers of math minutes for math instruction during the normal school day. Likewise, a priority is literacy and language arts, and we wanted to prioritize the supporting literacy in terms of instructional minutes, and again, maintain daily intervention and enrichment time for our students.
This is Dr. Elliott, and to continue on with the work that this committee did and really trying to make decisions based on the priorities that we established. The research that we did really looked at 13 school districts in the the suburban Philadelphia area, and we really targeted looking at how those districts allocate their instructional minutes at the elementary level. And the data on this slide show some of the results of looking at the averages across all of those districts. And starting with language arts, when looking across those districts, the average daily minutes for language arts was 116 daily minutes, with a range from the highest at 165 to the lowest at 90. And comparing that to our minutes as a district that as they currently stand, our grades 1 through 3 minutes are at about 125 minutes daily, but our grades 4, 5, and 6 are 90 minutes. So grades 4, 5, and 6 fall into the lowest range of instructional minutes that are offered for language arts. When we looked at math minutes and the average math minutes for the districts that we researched, the average minutes were 70 minutes daily, with the highest at 90 and the lowest at 60. All of our math minutes are at 60, which is on the low end. And when we compared to some of the highest achieving districts in the area, their average or their math minutes are much higher than ours. Wissahickon has 75 minutes daily for math. Central Bucks has 80 minutes daily for math, and Westchester Area School District has 90 minutes daily for math. Additionally, in our research and look at how schools are using their minutes at the elementary level, we looked at science and social studies, and the average combined minutes for science and social studies is 52 daily minutes. It's important to note here in this research that we did that every single district that we researched, as well as some others that we have gained some information about, all districts combine their science and social studies into one block at the elementary level. Some of those districts that are high achieving districts that combine science and social studies at the elementary level include Central Bucks, Wissahickon, Great Valley, Unionville, Chadsford, Radnor, Westchester, Lower Merion, and Garnet Valley. So the proposal that we have with combining science and social studies minutes, as Dr. Frazier said, is not a radical change, but it is something that is aligned with the many high achieving districts in Pennsylvania who currently provide excellent instruction for their students, and their students meet with great success. Finally, as we looked at our research on minutes across other school districts, we also looked at minutes that are used for intervention. And those minutes averaged 32 minutes a day, and the highest was 45 and the lowest was 15 minutes. And in our proposal, we fall close to the middle of that, the average there, with 25 minutes in grades 4, 5, and 6, and 20 minutes in grades 1, 2, and 3.
Dr. Elliott, before we jump off that slide, if we could go back real quickly, I just want to revisit that fourth bullet point there, the average combined minutes for social studies and science. And Dr. Elliott had referenced some specific districts because we had surveyed more than just the ones that she referenced. So in going through this myself the past couple of days, I'm going to read off names of districts who all combine science and social studies, and their average isn't 52 minutes a day, it's 48 minutes a day. And understand that what we are proposing is 60 minutes a day in the upper grades. So these districts taken together have an average of 45 minutes a day for combined science and social studies. That would include Central Bucks, New Hope, Lower Merion, Radnor, Wissahickon, Westchester, Great Valley, Garnet Valley, and Unionville, Chadds Ford. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the things that we did as a committee was really keep focused on our priorities and continue to remind ourselves that no schedule is ever perfect, and that when you're looking at a schedule, it's important to, as Stephen Covey says, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. And we focused on making sure that we were scheduling our priorities as we worked. In order to gain consensus with the committee, we worked to ask each committee member to consider each of the priorities and review the proposed schedule and say yes or no with respect to, does this schedule help us to meet that particular priority? The data that you see in front of you here shows for each of the different priorities that we have established, as well as the entire plan, that we did reach consensus as a committee. You'll see that approximately 87% of the committee agreed that this plan supports our priority of student wellness. 100% of the committee agreed that this plan supports our priority of literacy and numeracy. 97.4% of the committee agreed that the plan supported our priority for teacher collaboration and student intervention. And finally, 79.5% of the committee agreed that this plan, they could support this plan and move forward with it. As noted earlier, every priority does come with some trade-offs. And when we looked at this plan and looked at what those possible trade-offs are, these are the items that are the trade-offs that come with really focusing on our priorities. We are reducing the number of minutes in science and social studies in grades 1 through 5. But as Dr. Frazier has noted, high achieving districts on average have about 45 to 48 minutes of science and social studies combined. Our proposed plan has 60 minutes daily of science and social studies combined in grades 4 and 5. We are creating a rotating schedule for science and social studies to foster continuity of instruction, meaning that our students won't be alternating days necessarily for science and social studies instruction, but spending time a few days in a row really targeting a content area. We will be moving 5th and 6th grade course to before school in order to capture an additional 35 minutes for instruction in the 4 core subject areas. so that our teachers in 5th and 6th grade have those additional minutes to focus on math, on language arts, on science, and on social studies. And we are also making chorus an optional activity to provide student choice and support student wellness. And you will hear later in this presentation that our data and our look at chorus has shown us that while chorus and participating in music is something that many students value, we have students who do not wish to participate in chorus, and it's not something they would choose to do. And making it mandatory and forcing them to do so causes anxiety and can often cause behavior problems in chorus.
Thanks, Dr. Elliott. So when we looked at our instructional minutes, in front of you, you see a slide that demonstrates the instructional minutes for kindergarten. This proposed schedule change does not have an impact at all on the current kindergarten schedule. This schedule will remain the same in this proposal. Instructional minutes in grades 1 through 3, the boldface numbers in minutes you will see on this chart in mathematics, social studies and science, and intervention. You will see that in math, in grades 1 to 3, we're proposing moving instructional minutes from 60 minutes a day to 75 minutes a day. In social studies and science, the proposal is to go from 40 minutes a day to 30 minutes a day. And as Dr. Elliott said, for continuity of instruction, we would have a rotating schedule. And then, of course, intervention time, we would be moving from 25 minutes a day to 20 minutes a day. And at the end of that, we are still working within our number of 390 minutes of instruction a day. In grades 4 and 5, it's consistent with the slide that you just saw. The boldface numbers will demonstrate what this proposal means in terms of instructional minutes. Once again, boldfaced would be language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. In language arts, we're proposing that we move from 90 minutes of instruction a day to 100 minutes of instruction. In math, from 60 minutes to 80 minutes. And then science and social studies, 45 minutes each to 60 minutes combined, rotating. We believe that these minutes are more closely aligned to what we found in doing our research with other high-performing districts. In 6th grade, we are not proposing any change, and like kindergarten, in this schedule, 6th grade would remain consistent. Of course, there are implications of these changes. These changes would be used to support math instructional minutes. Again, you would see a reduction in science and social studies minutes, a change of the current format for gifted support, and Dr. Lambert will talk about that in a few slides from now, and a change to our current format for elementary chorus that Dr. Elliott spoke to, and you will hear more about in a few minutes. At this time, Mr. Harlan.
That's me. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mr. Harlan, John from Soul Finestone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the increase in math minutes. So while you're looking at this slide, there is a need to increase the minutes. You know, I can speak for all the principals, elementary principals in Council Rock. This year, the time we were in school, very stressful for teachers in grades K through 5. Because not only because of the new program, but it really wasn't about the program. It was just about the fact that they didn't have enough time to teach because of some of the components like number corner. So in grades K through 3, you know, number corner is, I compare it to like a daily workout. So, you know, in order to see results, you got to do your daily workout every day. And you need at least 15 to 20 minutes to do that to see results. And that's what Number Corner is like. Number Corner in grades K through 3 builds a foundation of skills. It's a counter math, it's problem strings, solving problems. And the most important point is some of the standards are only touched in Number Corner. So teachers need that time in grades K through 3. They need those 75 minutes of instruction. And in grades 4 through 5, you know, they have bridges, but they also teach Number Corner. And when it comes to grades 4 through 5, the biggest thing that, you know, I want to stress is the fact that the material and concepts are more complex, and it takes more time for teachers to instruct and to, you know, get the concepts across to children when it comes to direct instruction, small group instruction, independent practice. So just to fit everything in, that goes back to, you know, not only student wellness, but it goes back to teacher wellness. So that's why it's really important that we increase, you know, these math minutes in grades K 1 through 3 and then 4 to 5. And some of the pros and cons, you can see clearly that the pros outweigh the cons. I just want to mention when it comes to the cons with science and social studies, you know, as already mentioned, looking at the other high performing districts in our area or in the Delaware Valley, you know, they all go with this model. They're all aligned with going alternating science and social studies. And I think it's also important, I mentioned wellness. You know, I think it's important that we take something, we always keep adding things to teachers' plates, and we never take anything off. And this here, you're taking something off a teacher's plate by not having them, especially in grades 4 through 5, having them teach science and social studies every single day. So I think that's really important for the teacher wellness part. And finally, you know, I think this is an opportunity for our district to do more integration of STEAM when we talk about ELA and we talk about math. So I think it's important we take advantage of this opportunity and see how we can integrate more STEAM into those areas. I mean, our teachers are already doing it. I see it on a day-to-day basis, but you know, like I said, it's an opportunity that we should take advantage of.
So I guess this is me. This is Chuck Lambert, Director of Special Services for the district. I'll talk a little bit about the impact upon the gifted program. As most of you know, that you know, research supports the need for students who are identified as mentally gifted to have part of their day with similar ability peers. And in Council Rock School District, we do that historically through the social studies program. So this model continues to allow our gifted support teachers to do what we call compacting of that social studies curriculum. They tend to move more quickly through that social studies curriculum than might happen in the regular classroom. And then with the time that they free up through compacting that curriculum, they're able to provide opportunities for enrichment and acceleration for the students in not only social studies, but in an interdisciplinary manner as well. One of the goals that we have is to be able to link the gifted support program to the supports to the win time in the elementary schedule, so that time where students are receiving typically remediation and some enrichment, we can kind of refocus some of that time for our gifted students in providing further opportunities for acceleration and enrichment. We'll make an effort to schedule the gifted support time adjacent to the win time in grades 4 and 5, which will then allow that to be an easier flow of providing that additional time for them. We also have an opportunity, which I think is very exciting, to provide some opportunities for teachers of the gifted to enrich students within the general education classroom. The days that they are not receiving social studies instruction, when that grade level that they're working with during that time period is in science class, those teachers would then be able to go in and provide what we call push-in opportunities in the regular classroom to provide some enrichment and acceleration right within the classroom for those students. Currently, the schedule will not create any change in what we are doing schedule-wise for the 6th grade. So in grades 4 and 5, that daily gifted support will happen it will happen during social studies and during the win time. The students will meet with a gifted support teacher 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the schedule for the grade level, for social studies, and then also get support during the win time and during the science, not necessarily in science, but the time that class is in science. And in grades 2 and 3, it's 2 times per week. And again, the potential use of the win time for additional support. Looking here at the pros, it maintains what we currently are doing in terms of the compacting of the social studies curriculum. It gives us the opportunity to provide some more use of the win time in working with the students. And it provides an opportunity for those gifted support teachers to work with the students in their regular education classrooms to some degree. Con is there is a slight reduction in the cumulative number of minutes of pullout for the gifted support students, but I sense that overall, there will be some increase in the support they're receiving from their teachers, the gifted support teacher in particular.
I'm going to take over here. My name is Joe McClay, principal of Holland Elementary School. Go Hawks. I'm going to share discussions we had when we were talking about course. While considering the priorities, the committee discussed moving course for 5th and 6th grade to before the start of the school day. And this move would make course optional for students. When we were discussing the possible move, the committee was provided information from research that was done. The research provided data from 17 local school districts identified as best communities in music education. All these school districts offered elementary course, but the grade level in which it's offered varies depending on the grade level configuration of the building. For example, our buildings are K-6 and some of them may be K-5. Chorus is not mandatory in 12 of the 17 districts. It is mandatory in 5 of the districts. But in these 5, 3 offer it during their general music class. So there are 2 districts of the 17 that facilitate chorus in the manner similar to Council Rock. In these surveyed districts, it was reported that chorus participation varies from 35% to 100% when it's offered as optional. And in addition, chorus meets at varied times during the day, including general music, before school, or during recess. Also, chorus is typically offered once a week or once within a 6-day cycle. And as we were meeting, the committee also reviewed the pros and cons to this move. Regarding the pros, children can still participate in multiple music activities, like band, like orchestra, like the school play. In addition, it would allow for student choice. We also talked about the fact that it would support the strategic plan goal of student wellness. Some students do not want to participate in chorus, and the move could decrease anxiety and behavioral issues for students who do not want to participate. And also, it would provide 5th and 6th grade teachers at least minimally 35 more minutes of weekly core instruction. We did also talk about the cons. The first one that we talked about was the number of students in course could decrease with moving the program to the beginning of the day. Also, it could be difficult for some students to attend due to transportation issues and getting a ride to school. And moving course could conflict with other morning clubs such as a STEM club or a running club, etc. But currently there are schools that have band and orchestra rehearsals in the morning, and these rehearsals run simultaneously with other before school clubs that are offered.
So this brings us back to a quote that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that the key is not to prioritize what's on our schedule, but to schedule your priorities, by Stephen Covey. And to take us back to what our priorities were that this committee established at the outset of their work. Student wellness was our top priority. And it's important to remember that not only is student wellness the cornerstone of our strategic plan, but it's critically important to student success in school and in life. If our students aren't feeling good about themselves and feeling safe and valued in school, their ability to be successful in other areas is hurt and is challenging. Our second priority of the importance of literacy and numeracy instruction, which you've heard from Dr. Frazier, from me, and from others, cannot be underscored enough. Literacy and numeracy are foundational skills that are absolutely necessary for success in all other subject areas in school and beyond school. Further, I believe that it's our moral imperative to ensure that our students are literate in reading, writing, and math as they go through school, so that when they leave us and graduate, they have the skills, the critical skills necessary to function in whatever choice they make when they leave high school. We also know from research that teacher collaboration and student learning, about student learning and teaching, as well as a targeted focus on providing intervention for those students who need more help or enrichment, increases student success in school. And these three things continue to be our priorities throughout this work. And just to highlight, here's how the schedule changes meet those priorities. When we think about student wellness, we are maintaining that daily time for student wellness activities that happens as part of the elementary school day. And it's critically important to have that time, that community time, that time for building relationships, that time for solving conflicts together. Those are all important aspects of student wellness that we believe are very important and value in our day. We are continuing with the arts, and we value the arts and the importance of the arts to student wellness. And this not only means music through our general music education program, which our students get weekly, starting in kindergarten and through 6th grade, as well as the many additional opportunities they have with music, but also through the visual arts and through physical education. We value that and continue to include that in our schedule because it's important to student wellness. And finally, in this schedule change, when we think about student wellness, the ability for student choice regarding course participation is key to student wellness. As Mr. McClay noted, we know that we have students who do not want to participate in course, and it's not something that they're interested in, and making it mandatory for them may increase their anxiety or even cause behavior problems during course instruction because of the fact that the students do not want to be there. Our priority for literacy and numeracy is met through this schedule with the increase of language arts minutes in grades 4 and 5. If you remember from the beginning of the presentation, currently grades 4 and 5 have 90 minutes of language arts instruction. We are increasing that time because we value the importance of building literacy and the importance of language arts in elementary school. We are also meeting this priority by maintaining those language arts minutes in grades 1 through 3. We maintain this priority of literacy and numeracy with our increase of the math minutes in grades 1 to 5 to really provide that time for our students to develop those math skills and those conceptual understandings in mathematics that are going to lead to success in later math courses. And finally, with our focus on literacy and numeracy, the movement of chorus affords our teachers in grades 5 and 6 additional minutes that they can use for core subjects, all 4 core subjects: language arts, math, science, and social studies. When it comes to our priority of teacher collaboration and intervention time, we are maintaining that through keeping that daily intervention time as part of our school day at the elementary level. We are also meeting that priority by maintaining the opportunities we already provide for teachers to meet in collaborative groups and talk about teaching and learning. And finally, our shift of minutes does reduce the use of intervention time for core math instruction, which, as Mr. Harlan discussed when he talked about math minutes, our teachers needed time to provide the math instruction that was necessary, and they often borrowed from other parts of the day. And by providing this dedicated time to math instruction, we're keeping that opportunity for intervention, as well as the opportunity for student wellness open to be focused on those particular aspects of the day and not used for math instruction. With that, Mr. Tate, that ends our presentation, and all of us are ready for board questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. Thank you, Mr. Sanko and Mr. Hartland and Mr. McClay and the other members of the committee for your hard work. And that was an excellent presentation, even better than when I saw it last week. So thank you. We will go forward with board discussion. And the first hand I see raised is Mr. Hidalgo.
Oh, thank you, everybody. And I appreciate all the work that went into the committee and, you know, understanding the time constraints that we had with the pandemic, that we're looking at this now and looking to make a, you know, a decision next week. My priority, just to start off with, is actually the arts are very important to me. And so there's two different things here. We have the music, then we also have science and combining social studies. And the effects to the humanities programs also concerns me a little bit. It's all new. What I'm hearing tonight is one side. I don't hear anybody advocating for the opposite of holding these programs, or maybe holding off and doing a little more discussion. And so I have a lot of questions about the presentation. I appreciate them all. But the one thing I would just gathered from the presentation was that we have children that don't want to do something, let's say in this case, choral singing, okay? They have an anxiety. To me, that anxiety is a growth opportunity, because if you're going to say anxiety, we're talking about maybe stage fright or the fear of public speaking. These are amazing growth opportunities. I can tell you from somebody who actually sings on stage and went through all of these emotions as a child or even as a young adult, that it benefited me greatly to get up there and fight that demon. And it's made me a little bit better. As you can see, I'm up here and I'm talking, I'm not shaking my boots. Well, maybe a little bit, but that's okay. That sometimes never goes away. But I think if we say, we set a precedent that, and maybe this isn't the only reason, but it's a reason being given tonight, that if you don't want to do something, if you don't like math, if you don't like social studies, if you don't like gym or anything else, all you have to do is protest, throw up your head, be a behavioral problem, and maybe they will cut that course out for you. And so I would weary about setting that kind of precedent. If there's other reasons to do it because we want to make more time for math, that's definitely an argument to be made. But I would like to hear from the flood of people out there that say different, because this is something we've been talking about since I got on the board. People have mentioned that this was in the scopes, that other teachers or other professionals or parents want this time for something else. I would like to hear the advocates and all the studies out there that show that choral singing and music and everything else builds character. It correlates to better academics and actually helps student wellness. I know how I feel after I get through that. And if there are people who don't want to do it, well, then maybe there is an opt-out for them. But I don't think you should ruin this for everybody else or cut it. And then now they have to come in before school, which is a transportation issue. Some people just can't do it. And we're going to miss out. Not to mention that this is the recruiting tool that we use, that why we are every year over year a #1 musical accolades for the best music programs in the state, if not even in the country, you name it. And people, we will suffer, that program will suffer, and there are consequences. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And so I understand where you guys are coming from, but I would like to and we still have music, in that time, but this is something that is offered at no cost to the students. And maybe there's another way to do it. As I said, no schedule's perfect. So that's the one point about math. I'm going to hold off on the science and feel to hear what everybody else says, but I'll say with humanities, to cut the classroom time where the kids are all together, I know by having someone in humanities that's still a very valuable time, and to cut into that time for that type of student is something I would think really hard about. But I'd like to hear from the other side. I would like to hear from the music teachers that are advocating to keep it, and all the studies, because I can talk to other musical professionals from other school districts, and they highly suggest, and not even just that, they're administrators, but they happen to have the knowledge and love of music. So I think we have to think really hard about it. Not to mention, not make any quick decisions on this. So what I'd like to know is how many people, how often are we having disciplinary problems in chorus versus other classes, please?
Well, Mr. Hidalgo, thanks for asking that question, because I couldn't allow myself to not jump in around that anxiety piece. And so in a moment, I'm going to look to Mr. McClay and Mr. Harlan to help us understand what this looks like with real children and real situations. But the piece that I want you to allow me to emphasize is that the point isn't whatsoever that these kids are anxious about chorus. We have a number of students who suffer from legitimate anxiety issues completely and wholly unrelated to chorus. Now, when you have that same child who's either in 5th or 6th grade who doesn't want to participate in chorus for whatever reason, because they're embarrassed about how their voice sounds or whatever their reason is, now we're just adding on to that. And if this was a move that was bucking the trend and doing something that was out of the ordinary in any way, shape, or form, I could understand it more. But we have, as a school district, intentionally chosen student wellness as the epicenter. It is priority number 1, and priority number 2 is down the chart. There is a significant gap between student wellness and whatever comes in at number 2. And so I don't want the perception to be out there from anyone who's talking this evening that that chorus is causing the anxiety and we're going to reward them by not making them participate. That's not the fact of the matter here. The fact of the matter is that we have too many students that are dealing with anxiety in school, out of school, with or without chorus, and chorus is an added impediment to them being able to effectively deal with their anxiety. So I'm going to steal a phrase that Dr. Elliott used and talk about a moral imperative. When we have 17 NAM districts out there and only 2 of them run chorus the way that we do, that means we have 15 other examples where they are achieving that NAM status and achieving great success within their musical programs without putting students with high anxiety issues through that experience. So with that, Mr. McClay, Mr. Harlan, if you could give some color to this situation, please, that'd be great.
Sure. One of the things I'd like to report of some of the dialogue that we had as a committee. We did talk about as an option is making course optional during the day, but the other part would be twofold. Would be is who would be with those students. The teachers would be using that time likely for planning, and if they were, there wouldn't be anybody to be with them. You couldn't offer new instruction at that time. We already do have the win time in place already for students to provide anything that they may need. The other part to that is that some of the teachers do go to course to help with managing the students, because there are some challenges that do arise. And Dr. Lambert actually, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, had spoken to counselors who had reported that they have interventions in some of the schools with children who do have the anxiety piece already, like Dr. Frazier mentioned, and attending course. And it's not attending course, it's that performance part. And, you know, so, and Mr. Hidalgo, I mean, that's great. I mean, you're right. Performing does cause a certain amount of anxiety, and it's great to get over that. But it's one of the things that with kids, it precludes them from being not only comfortable in school, but learners also the rest of the day. So there are some discussions we had as a committee.
Thank you, Mr. McClay. Mr. Harlan, do you need to comment, or can we move on? I've
Could I
got
finish
3
my
other board
comment,
members.
Mr. Tate? Could I finish before you move on?
Oh, no, Joe, we'll come back to you if necessary, but I got 3 other board members who wish to comment. I'll do it in the order that they raised their hands. Dr. Thorworth.
Thank you. I'll be quick, I hope. Some comments and some questions, if I could, please. a year ago, we bought a new math program, Bridges, for the elementary schools. We have in our current elementary schedule a 60-minute block for math. However, Bridges requires 80 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I believe it's 80 minutes. So that's a 33% increase in the amount of time the math program requires. Now, as a result, studies, whatever that's in front of us, we're taking 25% of our social studies and science minutes in grades 1 through 3, and to me, an astounding 33% of science and social studies minutes in grades 4 and 5. In my mind, all to make room for math. Math is important, I get it, but I don't know if it's important enough to take that much time from these other programs. Now my first question, there was a slide presented that bracketed, it said the average for districts for, say, math is 70 minutes, and there was no point for those. But what was missing on that slide was the high and low brackets, the bands, if you will, for science and social studies. And at some point, I'd like to see those because that was the only one that didn't have the bands on it. I don't know why.
Dr. Thorwald, let me ask, are you asking what the ranges were for
Yeah,
the
please.
studies minutes?
Yes.
I have that in front of me. It goes anywhere from 30 minutes up to 60 minutes. We currently offer 90 minutes. So we're already, speaking of 33%, we're already 33% higher than the highest of all these other districts. And again, the average of the districts that I noted earlier isn't 60, it's 48 minutes.
Okay, I'll continue then. And then related to these minutes lost, which I will note is 150 minutes lost in the upper grades. We have a gifted program that's completely based in social studies. I won't bore you with my opinions of that, it's well known. But I'm not a fan, and I'm not convinced enrichment, because having a gifted student myself, I know what enrichment means, and it doesn't mean anything real positive is good. So we're sacrificing our gifted program here as well as part of this. And then I'll end with, we put a lot of emphasis on English language arts here, but yet we delayed purchasing or even looking at a new ELE program this year in light of student wellness, in light of implementation. And my wholehearted request is we delay this whole thing for a year and try and figure out everything we can. I understand why we're under the gun here in terms of time, but I think personally we could delay this a year, muddle through again in light of COVID, in light of everything else, and keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwald. Next on the list, in order the hands were raised, is Denise Brooks.
Thank you very much. I have some comments and a few questions. I will say, and I've expressed this sentiment previously to several of my board colleagues and to some administrators when I got this presentation earlier. I'm not happy about this. It's very hard for me to fully process the changes that are being recommended. And I mean, in a different situation, perhaps I could come around, because I think that this really requires some thoughtful discussion and feedback from teachers and the community, so that we understand the implications and are looking at things with a broad lens. Several times I heard that the changes that are being proposed are not radical changes or radical ideas. But how do we know that change itself at this time, with all the stress and anxiety that our teachers and our community and our students are feeling, that the change itself is not too radical at this time? So it's not the issues of how many minutes and what do high achieving districts do and how can we model it, but it's an issue about presenting significant change without what I feel is a really sufficient amount of time to study this, get the feedback that's needed, and process and have a dialogue. So in and of itself, you know, it's not the issues. I mean, it is the issues, but I just question the timing. When we talked about changes that would be necessary to schedules across the district, when we were implementing PLCs, we had a good period of time to solicit feedback, hear from the community, and in doing so, it altered what we recommended. And I wonder if we had the benefit of some good conversation with the community, if we might look at these things differently. And so, you know, I think that when we have change, the critical components of teacher and community buy-in make the change management easier. And so I just don't know that significant changes. So I mean, I will start before I ask my questions by saying I totally agree with Dr. Thorward on this, that while this may be worthy, I personally would like to see it not implemented and rush to a vote next week because I think it just needs a little bit more time. I do have a few questions. At this time, can students opt out of chorus if the situation is so stressful? I mean, do we have 100% participation regardless of feelings of, you know, how specific students feel? Is there an opt-out process for chorus?
Mr. McClay, you want to take that question?
Sure. I'm sorry that I can't speak for all schools, but most of the schools that I do know of do not have an opt-out feature. And there were options before, but it was really hard with regard to student supervision. That was a key component to that.
Okay,
So,
I don't know how broad this issue is about, you know, students who just may say, I don't like chorus versus those for whom it's a serious, you know, anxiety issue. So I don't know the volume, but I don't know. So therefore, I don't know if this is the right solution or if the solution is to try to address the issues with these particular students and not take away a program during the school day where larger numbers of students do enjoy it, and then you don't have the burden of the transportation issues and such. So I'm curious about that. When we say that we're going to cut content out of science and social studies, what does that actually mean? What will our students not be learning when we add more to other curriculum areas and take away from those? What do we know what units are actually going to be eliminated?
So Ms. Brooks, I think that's a couple-part question. So the literal answer to that would be predicated upon, obviously, the approval from the board to move ahead with this work, because that's work that needs to be done this summer. The much more nuanced piece, and to me, more to the point piece, is what we're talking about here is reducing science and social studies minutes in grades 4 and 5 from 90 minutes to 60 minutes. 60 minutes is still more than what most other districts have. And part of this equation is increasing the number of minutes that we have in English language arts. So when we talk about the primary grades, we're keeping the ELA minutes where they have been. And of course, that's when our kiddos are learning to read. Once we're into those intermediate grades, we switch that more to, of course, reading to learn. So I can speak as having been a 4th grade language arts teacher, 5th grade and 6th grade language arts teacher, that it is quite easy to find novels, trade books, etc., that bring in that, in particular, social studies content, sometimes science content as well, and you bring it right into that language arts classroom. So it's not as simple as saying, hey, we're going from 90 minutes to 60 minutes, so therefore we must be cutting out 1/3 of the content. That would not be the case because we are increasing the ELA minutes, and opportunities are there and will be there for some of that content certainly to make its way in there. It always has been and always will be.
I can certainly appreciate how the integration of certain social studies themes can be picked up in the ELA component through, nonfiction works and historical fiction and those kinds of things. I'm not sure that you can teach electricity or how to do mixtures in an ELA. So, there will be science kits cut. So we don't have the best, PSSA scores for science. And so, I do have a concern that, I don't fully know what this means in the loss, most particularly in science. And if this, in an ideal world, if something like this was going to be implemented, is the summer months, does that give sufficient time to really figure out how the curriculum will be delivered? I'm a little concerned that, the work would take place over the summer for implementation in the fall. I think that, if we hadn't been impacted as we were, the decision likely would have come maybe, discussions would have happened earlier in the year, and we would have had more specific answers to these questions now that we could talk about, as opposed to it's being developed in the summer and then, executed in the fall. So I'm not sure.
Well, Ms. Brooks, I can speak to that point that you make there and tell you that it is practice in our district that when we are doing curriculum work, revisions to curriculum, that typically is happening over the summer. And then at the start of the school year, when we have our opening in-service days, that is when teachers have the opportunity to review the curricular changes and really understand how that is impacted in all of the aspects of that particular course. So that's how it commonly happens, and this would be no different.
All right, thank you for that. I do think that 21 teachers is not necessarily a very good representation of the entire teaching staff. It's from a statistical significance thing, that's not close to being representative. So was there an opportunity to elicit any feedback from teachers outside of the committee?
I'll take that, Mrs. Brooks. So when we met with committee members, it was delivered through the committee and with the committee. We did not do a widespread survey or polling across the district.
Obviously it's anecdotal, but there have been several emails that have come into the board from teachers who are expressing some opposition to this, and that weighs heavily on me in trying to sort of evaluate that. So I welcome additional teacher feedback on this. Do we know, I'm a little concerned about just talking about things in averages and minutes, because it doesn't really necessarily give me the full picture of what's happening in other districts. So when you look at those other districts and talk about time, do we know how many of those districts have a STEAM special? Because I'll say, if we had a STEAM special, which I realize is unaffordable at this moment, that would make a lot of this a little bit more palatable relative to the science. It's still not 100% comfortable, but more palatable. So I'm curious to know about the other districts that have this reduction of time. Do they have the additional support of a special?
Ms. Brooks, we don't have information on all of the districts that we researched relative to a STEAM special. We do know that some of the districts do. We all know that Central Bucks has their Quest program, that's their STEAM special, and we know that Penridge this year added a STEAM special. But as far as gathering our data, that was not some information that at the time that we did the research, we gathered that information.
I'd be curious to know that if you could collect any more data on that. I know I'm talking a long time. I have a few more questions which I can ask later or by email as this continues before next week. But I do have one last question. And Dr. Thorwart mentioned it. I just want to know if this information was correct. I guess Dr. Elliott, you're the best one to answer it. Is it recommended with the Bridges program that math have 80 minutes of instructional time? Was that the recommendation with that curriculum?
Yes, the Bridges program is a program that is 80 minutes of instruction. There are two components to it. They're the core lesson, if you will, and then the number corner portion. And I think Mr. Harlan did a wonderful job of explaining the purpose of the number corner portion. It really does pre-teach and provide that distributive practice of important skills that are taught in the main Bridges lesson. So the two components are interdependent upon each other and really critical to the success of the program.
So,
All right.
I just want to ask a question. I'll follow up. The Bridges program recommends 80 minutes, but we felt it was okay to bring this curriculum in when we only had 60 minutes devoted to math. So was there discussion about looking at this change of schedule to find more time? Like, it just seems weird to me that, you know, we were comfortable with it a year ago and now we're looking for more time. Like, it's like a miss.
Like we've talked about that as a board in executive session. And I'd be happy to have follow-up conversation about that. But I think that topic has been made very clear since November to the board.
Okay, then I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Ms. Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Tate, and thank you to everyone for their presentations tonight. I have two comments. One is in terms of the chorus issue. I don't feel strongly about having mandatory or not, but I do feel strongly that there should be access in terms of just making sure that everyone can access the chorus program. I know sometimes it's hard for parents to do before school because of work or for other reasons. And so I just wanted to add that comment in that I think access is important for all programs, not just music. And then my other comment is more in regards to the social studies science change. I really just wanted to say I really agree with Ms. Brooks and Dr. Thorwart. You know, we voted on the Bridges curriculum a year ago. And so I guess from my perspective, I feel like I need a little bit more time to look at this instead of having a week when it's been a year since we voted on that curriculum. I think we need a little bit more time. The public needs more time to review it. For me, a week seems rushed, and that I really think that some of this work should have been done earlier than it has been. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marcel. Ms. McKee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. I also want to express my appreciation to the committee for their work. And I also appreciate the priority that's being put on literacy and numeracy. Having said that, I have to agree with Dr. Thorwart and Mrs. Brooks that I would feel more comfortable taking a little bit more time looking at this kind of a schedule change. In addition, just a comment about chorus. I know that at one time in one building, students could opt out of chorus, and by doing so, they would then participate in a sustained silent reading period and would be supervised by a teacher. As we talk about student wellness, I think chorus participation also contributes to student wellness. And I would hate to see us limiting that opportunity for any of our students who do wish to participate. That's all for me. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Solomon up next.
Hey, good evening. I'll keep this short, or we're going to be here all night. Just a couple follow-up questions along the lines of what my colleagues have talked about. I'm wondering, and you can answer my questions accordingly, when was the last time we actually, it's my understanding this could be the second time we changed the elementary schedule in the last several years to incorporate this proposal. In addition, that we did some changes a couple years ago with the PLCs. That's one question. Is the Bridges math program, is it available online? And how did that look as we talked through distance learning? How did it come out of distance learning in terms of that? And the last question I have, I'm very interested to know either, and we can talk about this offline, we talk about student wellness. I'm very concerned about teacher and staff wellness with this type of change. In addition, we're getting emails from staff, and incidentally, we got an email from CREA that they don't support this. So I'm interested to hear why the two CREA members on this committee weren't for the schedule. And obviously, we can talk about this offline. Thank you.
And we will talk about this offline. There's a lot more to this situation.
Thank you. I'm looking closely to make sure I haven't missed anyone. And it looks like we've covered all the board members who wish to comment. And I'll withhold my comment for tonight because of the hour, since we have a full agenda. Again, thank you to Dr. Elliott, Mr. Sanko, Mr. McClay, Mr. Harlan, and everybody else who participated. Thank you, Dr. Fraser. That concludes Education Committee.
Yeah, let me just say, because I feel a responsibility to the committee members. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I put you through all this time. We were asked, ironically, by CREA to address this issue. The board was made aware that we were working on this beginning on November 21st. That was one of 6 times. Most recent time was May 23rd. So I just feel very, very badly for the 40 individuals. I'm not sure how many teachers were expected to have on a committee, but it's very difficult, to put it mildly, to run a committee in excess of 40 people. And you saw that in the end, 79.5% of the people voted for it. And to have this group go through this work, Mr. Sanko to go through the leadership that he's provided for this, I just find to be unfortunate. Obviously, we are in the middle of a pandemic. We have been in the middle of a pandemic. That's why this came in June, and I'm sorry that that's not more understandable. Let's move on to facilities.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Ed, if there's anything that you need to interject, please feel free. I'll get started.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening.
Thank you. Tonight we're going to touch base, and I'll move through this quickly in the name of time. An update on Rolling Hills, Sulphine-Stone, Star Center, North Field improvements, Hillcrest and Richboro, and some miscellaneous agenda items, including service contracts. So Rolling Hills Elementary School is moving along well. On any given day, we have 40 to 60 workers on site following strict COVID preventative measures, including a daily check-in, temperature taking, and lots of hand washing, separation, and mask wearing. Going very well. The contractors are all doing well, and we are looking at an October completion at this point. I'll have a definitive date by our next joint meeting. But going very well. Just a couple pictures. I know you can't get inside right now, but as you can see, the kitchen is in good shape, coming along. Typical classroom, casework is in. The hallways, you can see this is a hallway that really has very little artificial lighting. Only those yellow basketed lights are the lights in that hallway. That's all natural light. You know, we've gone LEED gold on this project, and we have lots of borrowed light. And if you've been in the building before this project, you can really appreciate what's transformed here. And this is a shot of the new entrance. As you know, this building really had little sense of entry. We've created a defined parent drop-off and entrance point for community. Okay, Sulphine-Stone, although the project has been put on hold, we are going forward with the approval of the project with the township. I apologize, looks like the dates got jumbled up somehow on here. But at any rate, the key dates right now are July 21st and August 3rd for some remote meetings with the township to gain approval, final approvals of our project.
The other piece of information on Soul Finestone is that we are continuing to move along with a small piece of environmental work that is required. You can see the area in gray that's off of the existing multi-purpose room, the cafeteria area. A couple classrooms, some work above the ceilings that we'll address this summer, and we did that work recently. So we had good bid response, especially considering the COVID challenges, and our low bidder is Plymouth Environmental. They are about $50,000 below our budget estimate for this scope of work. The new Star Center construction, we're working with the township on the final approvals, trying to get the final land development agreement, escrow agreement, stormwater agreement, sewer planning module, which is in the final pieces of its approval. We did issue a notice to proceed for July 5th with administrative work happening in advance of that. We had yesterday a pre-construction meeting with the Bucks County Conservation District, Northampton Township, and other key players along with the contractors. And essentially, the contractor is good to start site work as of Monday, the 15th of June. So we're giving them an earlier start than we anticipated. And they will start mobilizing over the next couple of weeks, and you'll start to see some activity on the site. Also for Star Center, that's okay, Matt. There are a couple of professional services that are included as part of the current budget that was approved. Construction testing and special inspection services. We have a budget of $60,000. We're awarding a not to exceed $60,000 for soils testing, reinforcing, concrete, mortar, the things that we'll observe during construction to make sure the contractor is meeting the design intent of the project. And in addition, the HVAC commissioning verification and testing, adjusting, balancing inspection. We had a budget of $30,000. Those bids came in at $16,500. This will ensure that the equipment is started up correctly, that the duct that is installed above the ceilings and behind walls has no air leaks, the airflow is appropriate, the CFMs that we need in every room to meet the owner's program requirements. North Stadium is in progress, and again, they are moving along right now. They're working on stormwater improvements below the turf. So there were definitely some improvements we had to make beneath the turf. Those things are happening, putting in sleeves for play clocks and goalposts, working on electrical pieces of the project. And we're looking at a completion for the end of July, but the scoreboard may extend into August. The fabrication of the scoreboard was certainly affected by the shutdown of plants across the country. So they're working to get back up in operation and get these products delivered. So that's the one piece that could be behind. There's a couple progress shots. You can see this is the existing paving beneath the all-weather surface track, which has been removed. We're taking care of the crack repair, actually removing the asphalt down to earth and putting in new stone, new paving before we put a new surface back on the track. And then just an aerial shot. Dewey Engineering is getting some drone shots for us, so you can see an overall shot of the project. You see all the crushed stone where the trucks are driving across it. We protect the track, and again, doing a lot of subsurface improvements. Another project that we are working with is the Hillcrest and Richboro design phase, investigative phase work. Again, with the uncertainty that this project will ultimately go out to bid, we are working in hopes that we will be able to get to that point. This is work that we would have to do regardless of when this project would take place. We're working on sanitary line conditions, doing some camera work of those, some probes of the roof system, and we need to do some professional services agreements with a geotech. And you can switch the page here. So we're looking to bring in earth engineering for a cost not to exceed $20,000, basically to do some soils analysis, which we need to do to determine what the foundation design would be and how we can work to price the foundations, test probes of the soil for bearing capacity, test borings, infiltration testing for stormwater design, And those are things we need in order to get the project in front of the township as well. Miscellaneous, we have a couple service bids, trash removal, recycling services. We're at the end of our 3-year cycle with our last vendor. Advanced Disposal Services is the apparent low, and they are about $24,000 below our last 3-year agreement. So there's some savings there, which is nice to see. Fuel supply bid, you can bid fuel supply either as a fixed price or a floating price. Right now, with fuel costs being so volatile, the contractors aren't necessarily anxious to give you any fixed fuel pricing. So they give a differential cost per gallon, meaning you go with the current market value, which everyone is locked into, plus whatever costs there are for that specific vendor to get the product from their supply to our tank. So Riggins Incorporated was our vendor. They'll remain our vendor with floating fuel price index numbers that you see at minimal increases from last year. This is a year-to-year bid. Also, propane was bid. This one we were able to get a favorable fixed number for. We were at $1.35 for last year. This year we're at $1.09. So we are seeing about 17 cents a gallon savings, and primarily propane is used at Soul Finestone for the kitchen area. And we have the wood gym floor refinishing. Each year we screen and recoat the surface of the track or of the gym floor. We don't necessarily strip it down and put new paint lines down. This year is just removing the finish, putting a new finish down, and we're about $3,000 below where we were last year for this bid. And then board agenda items for next week. The construction testing that I talked about for Star Center. The geotechnical services that I discussed for Hillcrest, the trash removal, and the fuel oil supply and gasoline. And that should be it. That's all I have. Any questions on that?
Oh, good job. I actually have 2 quick questions. Regarding the North Turf, any other surprises at this point that we're seeing up there that we weren't expecting?
No, I mean, we have some allowances built in for unforeseens. We did have some soft edge along the inside edge of the paving around some of the perimeter of the track, the inside lane. We were able to remove about a 1-foot strip of that for several hundred feet, and we'll put new paving in its place. The difference between the track that we'll put in or the turf track transition is that we'll have actually a small trench drain that runs along the straightaways that allows water that sheets off of the track to get into that trench drain and into our storm drainage. The old design was basically turf up to a concrete strip and then the track. So we had to get a clean transition there. Otherwise, no major surprises at this point, no.
Rolling Hills on time, or we have a projection on time, and the changes that we had to make there with COVID, any issues that you saw, any delay in services or anything?
No, I mean, again, realistically, there's a chance that they finish Rolling Hills sometime in September, the end of September. We're thinking realistically October by the time we get everyone out and the building finally cleaned. Had we not been hit with the COVID situation, we absolutely would have had that building up and running in July and ready for students on time. It's really a shame all the way around. However, we will be sure to reschedule now the new furniture delivery for the month of October into November. And knowing that this is likely going to be a November Thanksgiving break, perhaps kind of move, we'll start to work on rebidding the moving services to get the Rolling Hills from Richboro Middle over to Rolling Hills, and then Chuck's program into the former Richboro Middle School. And I'll work closely with our team, including our transportation team, to make sure that we get this all squared away.
All right, good stuff, Doug, as always. Mr. Aldago, you have your hand up. Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, real quick. Doug, as far as Soul Finestone's concerned, that's not on the agenda for next week, right? You didn't mention that one. That's already, the environmental project's already been approved to do, right?
No, it should, if I didn't say it, it should be. It is on the agenda, so the environmental piece is, Joe. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other thing is just, that's not a funded project yet, right? We don't have funds for that construction.
Well,
So, yeah.
I would defer to Bill, but I think between Bill and I mean, there's probably some monies that are still, I don't want to speak for Bill, but I think the monies for that can still be found, perhaps from this year's budget, but I'll let Bill answer that.
Yeah, and that's fine. Bill can, well, before I train of thought, go ahead, Bill, sorry.
Yeah, we'll look at the borrowed funds and see if we can take care of this small scope of work out of that funding.
Okay.
It will be tight, but I believe that we can, at the very least, we would have to borrow from the general fund and pay it back when we undertake our next borrowing.
All right, and then I guess I'm just trying to get kind of like, do you have a forecast? Because that's the next project that's for building, large project on the agenda. Do we have any kind of idea of when, if we're going to propose to get back on track with that, if things go well? Is there kind of a time frame?
Yeah, I think realistically, the summertime, once the final budget is approved, it will be a good opportunity to take another look at the bond market and see what's been happening. It seems to have settled a bit, and so perhaps it would be a good time to dust everything back off and see where we stand at that point.
Basically in the next couple months.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's it.
You're welcome.
Dr. Thorwart, you have your hand up?
Yeah, real quick, Doug. Trying to move over Thanksgiving weekend, are we going to pay a premium for that? Is it worth waiting, moving? Maybe we can't, but I was just curious. That's all.
No, to be honest, Mike, these moving contractors move so quickly with these projects. They bring in an army of men and they'll move within a day or two, especially knowing now that we can move the building one right out and the other right in, and they don't have to stage anything. It's probably about a 1 day's move of collecting everything at Sam Smith School over at the former Richboro Middle School, and certainly a day to move Chuck's program over.
Okay.
So
that's all. I'm just curious.
No, we have a lot of experience, and Andy Sanko and I have worked together on making similar moves. So I'm confident that we'll develop a strong plan to make this work as seamlessly as we can.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this point? I don't see any other hands, so we can, Mr. Marcel and Mr. Bilek can take over the next phase of this.
Thank you, guys.
Mr. Stone, are you ready?
I am just about ready, just
Okay,
getting
great.
the
Thank you.
presentation ready. Okay, good evening, everyone. And I also have a number of items to discuss. I will move quickly through many of them as they are recurring in nature, and this is the time of year where we're getting things set up for the next fiscal year. But at a couple of different points during the presentation, I'll pause to take questions on those groups of items, and then obviously we'll end up with the final budget recommendation for next year. The first item is a recommendation to approve the depositories for next year. There's no changes to our banking relationships proposed. We use primarily TD Bank and First National Bank for the majority of our checking, and then we use the Pliget, Wilmington Trust, and Stonecastle for our investment accounts. We have two bids that I'll be bringing forward for approval next week at the board meeting. The first is the athletic supplies and equipment bid. It's up about $9,900 over next year, but remember that this is just the mechanism that gives our athletic directors the ability to purchase bid protected items. It's not necessarily indicative of the budgets that will be available or the final quantities that will be purchased. So the second bid that we'll be bringing forward is the medical supplies and equipment. And this was a unique bid given the timing that it went out. It was released to vendors during, prior to the pandemic. The pricing was received right around the time that the closure was happening. And we've already been notified from several vendors that we're not going to be able to honor the pricing that they set forth in their bids, particularly around masks and gloves, some of the high profile PPE that we're talking about. So this bid is down fairly substantially in terms of the number of items awarded as well as anticipated dollars. And that's because we are rejecting most of the masks and gloves that were bid. And although that seems counterintuitive at a time where we would likely want to be purchasing PPE, the Bucks County IU is coordinating a county-wide PPE bid, which will include all the quantities that we will need for masks, gloves, and all the other PPE, distance markers, plexiglass shields. As we develop the reopening plan, we'll be able to utilize that bid to make sure that we have bid protected pricing. We're recommending approval of the purchasing cooperatives. So these organizations are utilized in lieu of publicly bid projects, so we can purchase from these authorized cooperatives in a more efficient way. They're bid on a larger scale, multiple organizations. Some of these are statewide, some of these are national cooperatives. Gives us the opportunity to just look at some of these and get things a little more quickly. I've noted a few of the practical examples here of some of the items that we can purchase. And we still, even though this is a more streamlined approach to purchasing, we do still use a hybrid model of seeking price competition through multiple vendors. So you can, while using these cooperatives, you can have vendors bid against each other, and we do that in every case to make sure that we are still getting the best price, even through the more efficient route. There's no changes to the recommended cooperatives for this year. This is the same list that was approved last year by the board. The last item before I pause to take questions is a recommendation to approve the CR South Senior Prom contract as well as the senior trip contracts for North and South. This is certainly a hopeful recommendation that we will have returned to normal and that our seniors will have the opportunities that were unfortunately taken away from the class of 2020. These trips are funded by the students. The district just serves as the contracting entity, which is why the board has asked for their approval. And they are fairly straightforward, no changes to the information or the contracts that are set forth here. They're similar in dollars and in terms. Any questions on those items that I've covered so far?
It looks like Dr. Thorwart has his hand up.
Yeah, Bill. And just it's more clarifying than a question. There's a great deal of angst out there amongst parents right now, and you mentioned PPE, distance markers, and plexiglass. I know you didn't mean it as you already know you're going to need these things, but I just wanted a point of clarification that we've only just begun, and certainly not publicly begun, talking about how we're going to handle schools in the fall in this COVID environment. So I don't want parents to think they missed something or something got slid through underneath everything else here. So
you are correct, Dr. Thorwart. Thank you for clarifying that. I use those examples simply to demonstrate the breadth of the bid, that it will be comprehensive for any of those items that might be needed when a final plan is determined.
Understood, but I wanted to make sure.
Yep, good clarification.
Yep. So thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwart. Are there any other questions from the board or comments? Okay, Mr. Stone, please continue.
Very good, thank you. The next item is the insurance renewal for the upcoming fiscal year. Again, another annual motion. We approached this insurance renewal a little bit differently than last year. We marketed what's known as the package of insurance, which covers our property and casualty, our general liability, and some of our other insurances. We had marketed that package last year, and we were attempting to avoid market fatigue. The insurance market is particularly sensitive to quoting year after year and not making a change to the incumbent. So we were trying to avoid what would basically become a non-competitive market. But we did, because of the fact that our workers' compensation insurance mod, which is the factor that's used to calculate our premium, has been decreasing over the last couple of years due to favorable experience. We did think that it would be wise to go out and seek quotes for the workers' comp package, and we did do that. I'll show in a couple of slides that most of the insurances are remaining with the incumbent carrier, and you can see a comparison here. This first column is the expiring amount that we are paying this year, just shy of $1.1 million. Our renewal cost in the third column here will come in a similar place, about $1.06 million. And we are coming in, fortunately, under the budgeted amount for next year. There are a few coverage changes that are reflected in this renewal. Not as many as last year. We did do a very comprehensive review of the coverage. But again, I am recommending that the district decline the terrorism coverage for property. That definition in the policy is very, very narrow. And because it is so narrow, I don't believe that we would have a significant risk associated with that coverage. It likely would not be, the event would likely not be covered if we purchase that coverage. So there's little value, in my opinion, to increase our cost by that $8,300. The second item is to make a modification to our student accident insurance coverage to cover athletic events only. And this is a move to, it's a twofold move. It's obviously we want to decrease our costs, but it's also to just make sure that our coverage is more aligned with what the state mandates in the school code. We will, however, be offering voluntary coverage that parents can purchase for a fee. It's a very reasonable fee. And we will do some advertising to ensure that our families are aware that they can purchase this additional coverage, which would cover students if they were injured on the playground or in gym class. That coverage would not exist under this policy now. So it will be important that we do some advertising to make sure that parents are aware of that additional coverage. And then the third coverage that I am recommending is to add foreign liability. And that will cover our students who take trips overseas, the chorus and band trips, again, in hopes that we're able to return to that normal activity. So I'm recommending that we add this coverage so that if something happens to a student while they're overseas, that we would have sufficient coverage to be able to take care of bringing them back if they became ill and we needed to repatriate them, or if there were any other unfortunate incidents to occur while overseas. So I'm recommending that we make those last two changes noted here, which actually would decrease our overall premium by just under $15,000. And then the last slide related to insurance just shows the different coverages that we have, as well as the insurance brokers who will provide that insurance. All of these coverages remain unchanged as far as deductibles and coverage limits, as well as the carrier. The only difference, as I noted, were to the student accident insurance and to adding the new policy for foreign liability. Are there any questions about the insurance renewal?
It looks like Mr. Hidalgo has a question.
Sorry, I can't find the raise your hand button. Bill, I don't know. I'm kind of have an insurance background, and I'm thinking $19,000 for, it's almost about $1.50 a student. I don't think we can offer that kind of. What coverage are we losing? Basically, if someone gets hurt in on the playground, if they're not covered with their own insurance, they're going to have more exposure for $1.50 a kid?
That's correct. Yes.
I prefer to keep that. That's just my opinion. $19,000 to protect each student from injury would be important, unless you can tell me what the cost is for them to do it on their own.
I don't know off right now what the cost of the policies are that would be offered to families. I do know that they are tiered, but I can certainly follow up with what the cost would be to for families.
So the state offers a minimum or requires a minimum amount of coverage, and we're looking to reduce to the minimum versus what we've been doing. And I don't have the history behind it, but I, for one, probably would like to keep the kids insured for that amount. You know, I think it's important. Insurance is a very important tool, and accidents do happen, you know. So thank you. That's what I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Mr. Tate, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Stone, what I wrote down was it would modify student accident coverage to athletics. I thought it pertained to athletics.
The student accident coverage currently covers both athletics as well as accidents that might occur on the playground or in gym class or just walking the halls. The state's code notes that school districts may offer coverage for athletics. So it's a little bit vague in what in whether or not it's actually a mandate to provide that coverage. But my research of what is common in this area is that most provide that coverage for athletics only and provide this parent pay model for other types of accidents that occur.
Got it. So we still will cover athletics.
Yes, we will.
Okay, that's what was confusing me. Good to know. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Are there any other board questions before Mr. Stone proceeds? No? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Stone.
The next several slides are, again, an annual motion regarding our commitments of fund balance, but it's obviously a complicated situation that we alluded to at the budget forum with respect to COVID-19. So what we are required to do is we are required to establish the commitments of fund balance prior to the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th. But the amounts that we are actually committing to each individual category are not set until after the independent audit is completed, which would be likely at the October or November Finance Committee meeting. So you'll see here the commitments noted here in the far left column, but that there's no associated dollar amount. And again, we will do that once we see where our final numbers come in. We're making the recommendation to eliminate the commitment that we have for unanticipated healthcare expenditures. And the reason that we are making that recommendation is that the healthcare costs for the district are funded through what's known as an internal service fund. And it's separate from the general fund. The general fund makes contributions to cover the costs of medical insurance. And so that fund carries a fund balance in order to cover those costs. We have two commitments that we are recommending continuing. The first is for educational initiatives. This would be for any non-recurring strategic plan initiatives, so one-time costs that can be funded with fund balance, as well as the recommendation that we'll be making in just a few minutes about balancing the 2021 budget. The new commitment noted here is for COVID-19 expenditures, and there's tremendous uncertainty, as everyone knows, around what the reopening of school will look like and what will be necessary to purchase. And at this juncture in the budget, it's difficult, if not impossible, to try to calculate those costs and include them in the budget that the board is about to see. So I am recommending that we set up this commitment. It would be for any unbudgeted, non-recurring expenditures associated with reopening. So under this category could fall any PPE that might be necessary for reopening. If there are any one-time costs associated with changing transportation or bus routes because of social distancing, or any requirements in the cafeteria around social distancing if we need to incur additional costs with our contract for food service. So it's difficult really to know exactly what's going to go into that account, but we believe that it's prudent to establish this, and likely it will be a multi-year commitment. So when we talk about a commitment of fund balance that we will want to use for those non-recurring expenditures, it's important that we have a plan and have a needs assessment of when we're going to access that fund balance. So again, I just want to reiterate that our recommendation is to use this for any non-recurring expenditures. So those typically would be associated with non-personnel costs, or if they are associated with personnel costs, those costs should end when the reopening plan is fully phased in. So we want to make sure that, because this revenue is really just coming out of our savings account and is only able to support that expenditure one time, that it be used for those one-time expenditures. Our plan also includes making sure that we are first, before tapping into this fund balance, that we are maximizing any available funding opportunities. Presumably, you've heard about the CARES Act and the funding that's being allocated to school districts for economic stimulus purposes. There is currently an emergency disaster declared by the state, so the district is eligible for reimbursements through the emergency management agency. And so we want to make sure that we use those funds before we use the fund balance. But perhaps the most important part of this plan is that there's a significant amount of contingency associated with this fund balance. And we are looking at developing a reopening plan that's going to be consistent with CDC guidelines, health department guidelines. And until we really are able to determine what that reopening plan looks like, we're not going to know exactly what those costs will be. But so, for example, some of the questions that we are going to have to answer is who will need to wear a mask when we return to school? Will it be teachers? Will it be teachers and students? Will it be no one? Will we have to increase the number of bus routes temporarily to accommodate social distancing? If you have to maintain that 6 feet distance on school buses, we obviously would have to really change the way we do transportation, and would likely have to run our buses multiple times just to pick up the same number of students. So the plan that we have to develop for reopening, which again, as I mentioned before in response to Dr. Thorworth, that there is the plan is under development. We don't have a recommendation at this point on what it will look like, but it will be very important for us to take a look at what's in that plan to know how to access the fund balance. I've seen a couple of professional organizations that have developed some cost estimates that really have tremendous range of what it might cost to reopen. And again, these are not Council Rock numbers. These are just reports that I've seen. The Association of School Business Officials, which is a national organization, estimates that it will cost about $490 per student to reopen under the current guidelines. But on the other end of the spectrum, the American Federation of Teachers is estimating it will cost $2,300 per student. So that's a fairly significant range. That's a range of $5.3 million using Council Rock's enrollment to $25 million. So that's a shock. Those are shockingly high numbers either way. And again, we need to really get into the details of our plan to make a determination on how we use that fund balance. But it is important that we begin to set aside funds. If we do end up anywhere near those numbers, we will want to make sure we have funds available to provide that protection for our students and staff. This year, I'm also making a recommendation that we establish commitments of fund balance in our capital reserve fund. And this is just a distinction of different uses of the funds. We've primarily used that bucket of money for our summer maintenance projects, but we are able to utilize those funds for major infrastructure projects in technology, any refreshes of devices that we might need on a large scale, and similarly in the transportation department, any future security equipment that we might want to purchase for our school buses. So it's my recommendation to make that commitment in addition to those that I showed you on the general fund. So we'll be asking for that approval at the board meeting next week. And I'll just quickly share the part of the rationale for this recommendation in the Capital Reserve Fund was some fortunate news, thanks to the work of Mr. Adams, the transportation manager. The federal government recently reapproved the Alternative Fuels Excise Tax Credit Program, and the district is eligible for that program because the majority of our bus fleet is utilizing propane as its fuel source, and the district purchases that propane for student. So the program was retroactive for the 2018 and 2019 school years, and so the district recently received a deposit of $444,000, which was unbudgeted. This program is approved year by year, and so for the last 2 years we've assumed that it's not going to be approved. And again, just because of the uncertainty associated with it, I'm not recommending that we budget for the receipt of the credit in the 2021 budget. But because we've kind of come into this windfall, my recommendation will be to transfer these funds into the Capital Reserve Fund and set them aside for the future purchase of any security or safety equipment that Mr. Adams might recommend for our bus fleet. And this would be a nice way to purchase that without having to come to the board and to the community to have those funds come out of the general operations. I'll take a brief pause there, and Ms. Marcel, we can take any questions on the fund balance commitments.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. It looks like Dr. Thorwart has his hand up.
I can't help myself when you talk about reopening schools and COVID. I'm sorry. Again, just to point out to the parents watching, and because this could be reported later, we don't know what's going on. And, you know, you had mentioned increasing the number of bus runs. I want to point out, because parents will point out to you, that we couldn't find enough drivers to do our buses as it was this year.
Indeed.
And we're going to do a factor of, Bill, I don't remember what it was, but 12, 15 kids on a bus to make social distancing. The numbers are astounding there. So that was my first comment. We don't know yet. Please don't read too much into this, is where I'm going. And secondly, I hadn't seen your numbers about what it would cost per student, $490 to $2,300 per student. I know that range, as you quoted, was $5.3 to $23 million. I just want to point out right up front, we can't afford either, looking at the budget and the projections you've come up with. So we really need to think long and hard about this. And again, nothing's been decided yet. So please, if you're watching, don't go crazy yet. I don't think the powers that be have realized the level of impact some of these things will have on opening schools in the fall. That's all. Just one comment.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwart. Are there any other questions or comments on this section? No? Okay, Mr. Stone, keep going.
Okay, thank you. The next recommendation for the board next week is to approve the 2021 MBIT budget for the Middle Bucks Institute of Technology. And I've provided some information here with respect to the timing of this recommendation. This normally is something that gets approved by the board in March or April. And actually it was queued up to be approved at that similar time. And obviously with the pandemic, things financially changed dramatically for sending districts that send students to MBIT. So as you can see, the original budget called for a 6.7% increase to the sending districts for their contribution to MBIT, and called for budgeted expenditures to increase just shy of 5%. The business managers, the superintendents, the school boards of the sending districts asked MBIT, given the timing and the financial realities that we were all facing, to go back to their budget and take a look at expenditures and try to reduce the amount that the districts would have to contribute in recognition of the work that was being done. And MBIT has done that work. As you can see, their original budget came in at 6.7% increase to the overall sending districts, and the revised budget is now $223,000. And you can see the change in the expenditures going down from 5% to just barely above a flat increase. Council Rock has always been fortunate in the position that our payment is decreasing regardless of the increase that was set forth in the original budget, and that's due to our average enrollment. That's the formula for contributions is calculated on that basis. And so we were projected to have a decrease to our annual payment of about $12,000, and now with this revised budget that we're recommending for approval, that is now a $41,000 decrease. So it again is something that I've factored into the 2021 budget, and we'll be seeking a recommendation to approve this budget next week. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions from the board? Comments? It looks like Mr. Tate has his hand up.
Just a quick comment. I know that our representatives to the MBIT board, Ms. McKee and Ms. Marcel, put a lot of time into this budget process, and I think the end result is excellent. So thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Are there any other comments or questions on this issue? Looks like Ms. McKee has her hand up.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I also want to thank Dr. Frazier. He's our superintendent of record at MBIT. I want to thank him, and along with Mr. Stone, for their leadership through this very difficult budget process. Thanks to you both.
And it looks like Mr. Block has his hand up as well. Mr.
Yeah,
Block?
not so much as a question, as much or not so much a comment as much a quick question. First off, I appreciate the work that Ms. McKee, Ms. Marcel, and also Dr. Frazier have done. Highly involved in working to make MBIT as efficient and as effective as they've worked in our district. So we appreciate that. I did, given this is a fairly significant item on next week's agenda, I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to poll the board just to see kind of where everybody's head was at in terms of supporting this budget. So you know, as much as I'd like to see them do even more, as our folks have done, I think it makes sense to pass this one and continue to get on with the things that we're doing over there to try and make that organization even more efficient and more effective.
Mr. Block, I'm in favor.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Thank you, Mr. Block. Are there any other comments on the MBIT budget before we move on?
Andy, are you looking for comments from everyone, or are you just?
Yeah, I'm not looking for comments. I'm just looking to get a sense for, you know, general support one way or the other on this. Like I said, this isn't a vote, but we do need to bring it for vote next week. So if you know, there's some sense that you know, there needs to be more discussion prior to next week, I wouldn't mind fleshing that out now.
Yeah, and I got to echo Mrs. McKee. I mean, the amount of work that our folks have done on this it's impressive. And you know, going all the way back to when they came and visited us and gave us an overview of what's going on in MBIT in general. And this is a collaborative type of work that we have to do, not with just MBIT budget, but collectively even in our own budget. It's a team effort here. This is fantastic. I really, really appreciate the work that went into this.
Thank you, Mr. Salomon. Ms. Brooks, would you like to speak now?
Yeah, I mean, just because Andy asked, I do support this, and I just want to echo, I really appreciate Marianne and Kristen, your work on this, and just, so everyone is aware, our district didn't just push back once. I mean, you pushed back, you made them look at things, and then you still pushed even harder. And so it really goes to show that, the time and energy that you put forth a budget that is, something that we can approve. So I really do appreciate all that hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Are there any other comments from the board or an indication of where you are right now? Mr. Bialik, do you have any comments on this particular issue?
Sure. I kind of had the feeling. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling you were going to call on me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. So I really applaud the fact that Kristen, you went back. Mary Ann, we had to push several times. Listen, the budgeting process with MBIT has been a challenge for many years, and this was a year that was an additional challenge. And I would like to have seen some more significant cuts coming out of MBIT, but we're in a situation where I think this is the best that we're going to get. I would love to have the board vote this budget down and send it back again to MBIT. I don't think that we have the support of that for the board, but that would be my desire. I understand that time is working against us. We have to do our budgets very, very quickly, but I don't feel the same warm and fuzzy relationship with MBIT that some other people do. I think it's a great school. I think it does great things for the kids, but I think the budgeting process continues to be very, very challenging. So hopefully with this action and the look again at the many times we had to go back to MBIT, that we can make some changes at MBIT. So I'm optimistic about that. But sitting here right now today, I can't say that I'm going to vote for this. If I was pressed right now, I'd say no, but I've got a few days, another week to ponder that. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bialik. Are there any other? Oh, okay. It looks like Ms. McKee has her hand up. Ms. McKee, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Marcel. As Mr. Block asked, and you're trying to get a sense of votes, I will be voting to support this budget.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. Are there any other thoughts from the board? Dr. Thorwart, anything you want to add?
If you're trying to pull the board, I, and no surprise, fall in line with Mr. Bialik in that I sometimes am frustrated with the budgeting process here, and if pressed right now, I would be voting against as well.
Thank you, Dr. Thorwart.
So in addition to Dr. Thorwart and Mr. Bialik, are there any other objections? Okay.
Mr. Block, obviously I appreciate all the work done, especially by Dr. Frazier and Mr. Stone, Ms. McKee. It was quite an effort, and I think just in the environment that we're in, that we appreciate the fact that they were able to go back and find those savings. I do think that it would be nice to find more, because there are a lot of people that are focused on larger decreases than what they were able to find. But again, I think it's a positive step forward, and I look forward to finding more efficiencies in the future. So for right now, I will be supporting it, but we'll see what happens in the next week.
Okay. Sounds like, Mr. Stone, based on that feedback, there's no reason not to bring it forward next week.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Thank you, Mr. Stone.
Sure.
Can I just say one more thing before we move on? I did raise my hand again, but I don't think you saw it. I hope I said this, but the team at Council Rock, I really appreciate what you've done. I think I did say that, but if I missed anybody, Dr. Fraser, Mr. Stone, Kristen, and Mary Ann, again, I really praise what you did, and I know it was a lot of effort, and especially Dr. Fraser, I know you spent a lot of time on this, so I appreciate that. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Sorry, I didn't see your hand raised. Thanks again. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Do you want to move on to the next item?
I will. Thank you. The next item that we'll be bringing forward for your approval next week is to approve a waiver of the financial guarantee for our food service management company, who you all know as Chartwells. In the bid proposal that Chartwells submitted last year, they had guaranteed a profit to the district of $235,000, and essentially that means that if they did not make at least that much money through the operation, that they would write us a check for the difference. The contract that we have with Chartwells is governed by the PDE, Division of Food and Nutrition, and it's a standard form contract that they use for all food service management companies across the Commonwealth. So there's very little flexibility with terms, and one of the terms is that the financial guarantee is contingent both on enrollment and hitting the number of operating days as defined in the contract, which obviously we have for service days of meals, we have 174 at the high schools and, at the middle schools and high schools, and 177 at the elementary schools. Clearly, we did not meet that minimum this year with the pandemic. So there's certainly reason for the guarantee to be waived from that perspective. And I do believe that the district and Chartwells have reached a good compromise, which we are recommending that we waive that guarantee. Chartwells, in exchange, has agreed to waive about $64,000 of management and administrative fees that they would normally charge us and would likely be able to charge us under the terms of the contract. The contract, unlike other contracts that we have, this is not a requirements contract. They are entitled to their fees, but they are willing to, in recognition of the difficult financial situation, they are willing to make that concession on our behalf. They're also still providing a very valuable service during this closure. They're feeding students throughout the pandemic. They've been feeding since basically the end of March, and will continue to do so throughout the summer as we are in the process of beginning to advertise to our families. So it's a compromise without a doubt, and certainly the situation is very unique. I don't know how PDE will respond with contracts in the future with respect to the pandemic, but it is our recommendation to waive that guarantee and also to accept the fee concessions that Chartwells has made. Are there any questions or comments?
I don't see any hands raised. Are there any questions or comments on this item? No? Okay. Mr. Stone, please move ahead.
Thank you very much. The last item that we are recommending for approval next week before we get to the budget is to make a change in the delinquent real estate tax collector utilized by the school district. This is admittedly a pretty niche topic, but I'll try to briefly explain the reason for our recommendation. Our current situation is that we have our taxes collected by the Bucks County Tax Claim Bureau out of Doylestown under what's known as the Real Estate Tax Sale Law. That law established the Tax Claim Bureau and also assesses a 5% fee on all delinquencies that is right now paid by the district. That totals up to about $120,000 per year. I sent out proposals to two firms asking for their proposal to collect our delinquent real estate taxes under what's known as the Municipal Tax Claims and Liens Act, which is a different statute but is utilized across the Commonwealth for the collection of delinquent real estate taxes by both school districts and municipalities. The difference in the model is that the 5% fee is still assessed, but it can be passed on to the delinquent taxpayer rather than the district. So with this recommendation, if it is approved by the board, the transition would mean that that $120,000 approximate cost would now be passed on to the delinquent taxpayer and not paid by the district. In addition to those cost savings, I do see some other benefits associated with making the switch. We will very likely improve our collection rate because of the additional costs and fees that get passed on to the delinquent taxpayer. They are more motivated to pay. Portnoy, I've worked with them in the past. They offer flexible payment arrangements to our citizens. They've been very good to work with. I hear very few complaints about their services. But in addition to that, the improvement in that collection rate, we will see our distributions of delinquent taxes on a weekly basis rather than on a monthly basis, as we currently see with the Tax Claim Bureau. So our cash flows will improve, our collection rate will improve, our costs will go down. I really believe that this is a great recommendation, a move that we should make, and makes a lot of sense in the environment that we are entering with respect to our budget. But certainly if there's any comments or questions, Ms. Marcel, I'd be happy to answer them.
It looks like we have a question or comment from Mr. Hidalgo.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So we picked two to ask for bids. This is not a regular bidding process, I guess, where we put it out there. Is there a limited number of providers? And also I'm wondering if there was any chance that somebody might actually lower the percentage of fee from 5 to 4 or anything like that, if you know that's, or is 5 pretty much standard?
Yeah, so it is a pretty niche market. You have to have some very very experienced attorneys, and it's real estate tax collection is a unique aspect of school finances. So there are not a lot of firms. Portnoy is located in the King of Prussia area. They represent 50 school districts in the state. I did interview a local firm in Bucks County that just did not have the bandwidth to be able to do the work, in my opinion. And the 5% fee is statutory. That's required. So there's no way to reduce that fee that's being passed on to the taxpayer. That is set in law.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the cost savings and the flexible payment arrangement. So thanks for bringing this forward. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Mr. Bialik, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Bill, I just wanted to give you a bit of kudos. So this is a really good example of doing things differently and not just continuing to do things because that's how we've always done them. So you brought this to us with a great way to save money for the district and be more efficient. So I thank you for that. I also thank you for the fact that, when we were reviewing this, I said to Bill, isn't there anyone in the district, within the district who might be able to do this for us? Because Portnoy is out in King of Prussia. So we always want to support those folks that are in the district. So he did check out another firm that already does collections. As he said, I think it's based on EIT, earned income tax collections, but I think he did a very fair assumption of Portnoy compared to the other firm, and I think he made the right choice. So I just want to give you a bit of a kudos for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bialik. That was a great comment, and thank you to Mr. Stone for all of his work in that area. Are there any other board comments or questions on this one? No? Okay. Mr. Stone, it's time for the next item.
Thank you very much. And the next item is the recommendation that we'll be asking for your approval to approve the 2021 final budget. So I'll start with just an overall summary of the recommendation and walk you through how we got from the budget forum to the recommendation that we're making tonight. So you can see here on this particular slide what's in, what's out in the final budget recommendation. We are recommending a 3.1% real estate tax increase. That is the maximum permitted for the school district this year. Includes the Act 1 index plus the exception for special education expenses. The reason that we're recommending that 3.1% is obviously to maximize our revenue at a time when our financial situation is difficult. And also, as we'll talk about shortly, we are recommending to pause on the implementation of the transportation walk zone policy enforcement and the other efficiencies. And so in order to offset the fact that we are not going to budget for those cost savings, we needed to have some revenue to offset that. We are also recommending to implement a one-to-one initiative where one device will be provided to every student in the district. That's about $630,000 of costs that are added to the budget. We are recommending the inclusion of a new position to address a growing population of English language learners in the district. So there's a new 1.0 position in for ELD. That recommendation has changed based on our review of the landscape that we're facing, and just wanting to make sure that we do best for all of the students that we serve. We are also including the purchase, the renewal of the purchase of Qualtrics, which is our survey software. We obviously, as we begin to think about reopening and what that will look like, we have a significant need for surveying our community and collecting robust data on their responses so that we can be prepared with the best possible plan moving forward. So knowing that there are certainly other products that can survey communities, but certainly not to the same degree and level as Qualtrics, it's our recommendation to keep that in for this year so that we can utilize its capabilities to best serve our community. The last item noted on this slide is the inclusion of federal stimulus revenue and expenditures. The picture around the monies that will be available to the school district is beginning to take a little bit more shape. We are aware of 2 funding sources that will be available to the school district to help with offsetting some of our expenses that I talked about with respect to the commitment of fund balance. But right now, there's still a lot of uncertainty around the spending restrictions associated with that federal stimulus money that we are receiving. It totals just shy of $1.1 million. But we have to assume, because most federal legislation or most federal allocations of funds come with restrictions on how the money can be spent, we want to be cautious that we don't use these funds to offset our budget deficit or assume that we can use them for expenses that were already in our budget. We need to see the guidelines and thoroughly understand whether those costs can be applied. So right now, the budget is built with an increase in our revenue budget of $1.1 million, but a corresponding increase in the expenditure budget in the same amount. So those offset to zero. If we find when we review these, the guidelines, that we are able to offset expenditures that were built into the budget, we will certainly do so. It will mean that we will not need to access that committed fund balance. And so it's just at this juncture, with a week left until we approve the budget and not being able to see all of those guidelines, we're not anticipating seeing them till later in the month. That's why we want to recognize that those funds are available, but not be too aggressive with how they're budgeted. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the district's commitment to the strategic plan and particularly student wellness, the final budget recommendation includes the addition of 3 counselors at the elementary level, which will bring us to a 1-to-1 ratio at all of our elementary schools, 1 counselor per elementary school. And again, reiterate to the board that 2 of those counselors are grant funded by a state grant, which has already been approved and awarded to Council Rock School District. So only 1 of those positions is being funded in the next year's budget by local tax dollars. So here are the numbers of our final budget. We have revenues coming in at just over $243 million. We have expenditures of $246 million. And our use of fund balance, the net impact of increasing the tax rate and not taking the savings associated with the transportation changes that we will take more time to study and make a proper recommendation at a later time. We are utilizing just over $3 million of our fund balance, which represents about 14% of our savings to balance this budget. And you can see that $3 million right there. So certainly the most high profile aspect of the 2021 budget is the real estate taxes and the tax increase. So you can see these two charts here showing the change in the millage rate increasing by 3.1% or 3.91 mils to a total millage rate of 130.216. But similarly, there is still available to the district a homestead credit for that can be passed on to qualifying homeowners. So we have about $5.6 million of funds that we will distribute to just shy of 19,900 properties in the district, which will help offset individuals' tax bills by $283. There was some concern this year that the state might not be able to fully fund this homestead credit program, which has been in place for about 12 years and has over time reduced homeowners' property taxes. Fortunately, they were able to plug a hole in their budget and come through with the full amount of funds. There was a discussion that we might only get half, and so we were fortunate that we're able to receive the full allocation and pass that on to our homeowners. I thought it would be wise to show what the impact of the tax increase would be on homeowners, and rather than just simply using one particular assessed value, which is the value of the home upon which the real estate tax rate is applied, that I would use the median assessed value for residential properties, but would also show a property assessed at the 25th percentile and a property assessed at the 75th percentile, because certainly a 3.1% tax increase is a different dollar amount depending on your assessed value. So you can see the 2019 baseline taxes in this row here, and then the application of the new millage rate to that same assessed value calculates the taxes in this row here that I'm highlighting, and shows an annual increase ranging from $110 to $207, depending on where you fall on where your assessed value falls on the schedule. I also wanted to point out the difference in the annual taxes if the taxes were only increased by 2.6%, or the amount of the Act 1 index. And that difference here is $91.55 compared to this $109.72, for a difference of $18 per year, or about $1.50 per month. And then same calculation here, about $24 more in taxes by going to the 3.1%. And then for the properties assessed the 75th percentile, it's an increase of $34 over if the taxes would have been increased to the Act 1 index. This is a graph that I've shown during final budget presentations, just showing the blue bars as the tax increases approved by the school board. The orange line is the state's Act 1 index. And clearly this demonstrates that the board has approved budgets at or below the Act 1 index in years past, but we are, given the circumstances, making a recommendation to go above that Act 1 index this year. So a lot of numbers in this final budget summary. Our revenues in the top section, our expenditures in the bottom, and shows a bit of the historical information here. These first two columns show our actual spending for the last 2 full fiscal years, and then the budgeted amount for this current year ending June 30th, and then the upcoming year beginning July 1st. This is an unusual budget, certainly, for a number of reasons, but you can see here that in a rising cost environment with state mandates and federal mandates and contractual obligations, our expenditure budget is actually decreasing from $246.4 million to $246.1 million. And that's, it's been quite a while since the budget actually decreased here in Council Rock. It's also unusual because we are raising through the real estate tax increase about $4.9 million of local revenue, but the offsetting tax declines that we are anticipating associated with earned income tax and real estate transfer tax, interest earnings are essentially offsetting that tax increase. So our local revenue is flat. As a district that is primarily funded by local funds, this is a very unusual phenomenon to see local revenues essentially flat year over year, and certainly reflects the swift and drastic entry into the recessionary environment. So our overall revenue picture is increasing by about $1.1 million, and that is primarily due to the fact that we've included $1.1 million of new federal stimulus funds that will be used to help offset the budget, which is also included in this line item here. It's noted as the budgetary reserve at the bottom. So there's 1.1 million in this line here, and then an offsetting $1.1 million there. You see here a decrease in our instructional expense category. And the reason for that is primarily due to the salary concessions from the Teachers Association. The majority of our expenses lie in direct instruction, and the concessions that were provided by the or approved by the Korean membership and the board are helping to decrease those costs there. And you can see some of these other changes in the expenditure budget netting to an overall decrease of $277,000. I'll point out that also within this budgetary reserve, there is in lieu of budgeting for anticipated additional positions in the budget, likely in this category here, we do have a $250,000 staffing reserve, which would be used for any changes in staffing that might be necessary during the year. If that does not come to fruition, those funds go back into the fund balance. And that's really a very small overall percentage of our budget. It's 0.1% of our budgets. Many governments, many school districts use a 1% budgetary reserve to cover those unanticipated costs. So here's the pie chart of our final revenue budget. And again, we are a locally funded school district. 76% of our funds come from local sources, primarily through real estate tax and other taxes that are levied. This is common for suburban school districts in this area to see the majority of the pie coming from the local sources, and very, very little comparatively coming from state and federal sources, particularly when you consider that about half of the state sources are reimbursements for costs that we are mandated to pay for the contributions to the retirement system. And then you see as a percentage of the budget, about 1% of the revenue budget is that use of fund balance. But again, that represents about 14% of our overall fund balance that if the budget plays out as anticipated, we would need to use in order to be balanced. So here's the pie chart of the final expenditure budget. It looks very similar to the revenue budget, and that's because we are a people organization. We have students and we have teachers supporting that work. We have administrators supporting that work. So you see a rather large slice of the pie, also 76% dedicated to the salaries and benefits of the employees, either directly instructing or supporting instruction. 8% of our budget is dedicated to debt service. That's a manageable debt load. The target for local governments is typically around 10%. And then the 300 to 900 objects is essentially everything else that we need to run the school district. The goods and services that we purchase in order to run the day-to-day operations, supplies, equipment, things of that nature. So this is also a little bit of an eye chart here. It shows the largest, a breakdown of the largest part of our budget here, the total salaries and benefits. You can see that we have an increase of 1.69 employees, or excuse me, FTEs year over year when you compare this 1372.31 to last year. But again, I'll reiterate that even though we have an increase in FTEs this year, the concessions on salary are creating a decrease in actual costs. So I'll say again, we are adding a net 1.7 FTEs, but our costs are going down $729,000. In the benefits section, so these are all the benefits that we provide as part of our compensation plans. Two particular items of note. Just about everything is flat comparatively, but we had a very favorable healthcare renewal. It's a no increase to our rate, and also we have increasing employee share. So you're seeing a decrease in our healthcare contributions for the upcoming year. Those are being offset by the increase to the PSER system, and I'll point out again that even though our salaries are decreasing by $729,000, because the contribution rate to PSERs is increasing from 34.29% to 34.51%, that cost is increasing still by $1 million. So salaries are decreasing, but contributions to the retirement system are increasing. I'll review in more detail some of the major changes in the 300 to 900 objects, but we'll just point out very high level that the increase associated with that line item of about $58 million is the costs associated with implementing the one-to-one device initiative. It's also important to note that even with that additional $630,000 of costs for the 300 to 900 objects, when you also factor in that our major contracts and mandates that we have for charter school tuition and the additional expenditures associated with our debt service, those totaled up to about $623,000. So before we even got started on the 300 to 900 budget, we had to cover that $623,000. So we've reduced this 300 to 900 budget by an average of 15%. And so if we were not going one-to-one, we would basically be flat, which really translates into a reduction in the expenses in the 300 to 900 objects because we had to absorb the contracted costs and the mandated costs that are passed down to us. So this is just a graphic representation of contributions to the PSER system. In 2003-04, the contribution was just below 4%. As I noted, the contribution is now 34.5%. And I did a very rough calculation that if the school district contributed that same 3.77% on the current year's salary or the budgeted year's salaries, the budget could be reduced by $35.5 million. So over that period of time, that's the cost impact, which is in real dollars. The last slide I have just shows you the major expenditure changes in the 300 to 900 categories. As was approved last month, we have a new contract which allows for additional custodial FTEs. So we have some cost increases associated with that. But you see that the majority of the other accounts are decreasing. Primarily rentals. We have a partial year budgeted for our lease at the LSAC facility in Newtown. Tuition has been reduced to private placements to reflect our current profile of students. Fuel oil and electricity are decreased thanks to some better budgeting and more accurate budgeting around those two line items and our utility usage. Books and periodicals is decreasing because, as we've discussed, the Bridges program was purchased in 2019-20, and so there's a decrease because that was a one-time cost. Software is going up due to the investment in additional curricular resources, as well as some additional softwares in the technology department. Equipment is increasing by $139,000. So this is a net impact of the increase to afford the one-to-one initiative, plus another about $90,000 in the operations budget, and then offset by reductions in other areas of the budget. So this would have gone up higher if not for those reductions that we made as part of the budget process. And then the last two items, I alluded to the budgetary reserve on the previous slide, but this fund transfer line, which had not been budgeted in prior years, represents the estimated costs associated with subsidizing free and reduced students who are at the high schools, but because the high schools are not on the National School Lunch Program, we do not get a subsidy reimbursement, but we still want to make sure that we take care of those students. So we're just including that in the budget because it's a known cost and we anticipate having to incur it every year. So Ms. Marcel, Mr. Bialik, that concludes my presentation, and certainly we'll take any questions or comments at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. We really appreciate all of your work on the budget. I know you said it was an unusual budget, but you also spent a lot of time on it. And so I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done, to thank Dr. Frazier, and then to also thank all of the cabinet members for the work that they were able to do to make decreases in their areas. So I just wanted to thank everyone. In terms of comments, in terms of the board, if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand. But I also know that we have to have a sense of where the board is tonight. And so if you feel comfortable sharing where you are on the budget, that would be helpful as well. Ms. McKee, your hand is up.
Thank you, Mrs. Marcel. I want to echo your thanks. I also really appreciate all of the work that's gone into this budget. And I know that none of us is eager to increase taxes during this economically difficult time for our community. However, having said that, I am really pleased to see in this budget elementary counselors, the addition of a position of an ELD teacher. I'm very, very pleased to see that we found a way to include these important items in our budget. We know that English language learners in our district, it's a growing population, and adding a position is really necessary to properly serve these students. So I'm grateful to see those changes. I'm appreciative of all of the sacrifice that's been made. And if you're taking account, I would be willing to support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. Dr. Thorwart, your hand is raised.
Sure, I'll go next. In light of the kind of dire predictions we've been faced with here, I can support the 3.1% tax increase. There's things I'd like to see different in the budget, but you don't win everything, so I can support that as well. Bill, Mr. Stone, one question, and this can wait till after budget season. It's more me looking at data. I'd love to see those 300 to 900 objects as historically, you know, as a function of time, both as a percentage budget and as an overall total for like the last 10 years. We seem to shave a lot, very small chunk of our budget. So I just need to get a grasp on that, but certainly wait until after budget season. There's no rush for that. It won't impact my decision. So does that help, Ms. Marcel? Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Thorwart. Are there any other comments? Mr. Tate, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Ms. Marcel. I just wanted to express my support for this budget. Thank you, Dr. Frazier and Dr. Stone, for your hard work putting this together. You know, just a couple comments. Our district has been run very lean in recent years, and that really doesn't give us a lot of flex when it comes to a difficult financial time like we're currently in. The one thing that jumped out at me was what Mr. Stone noted about our debt service. It's still only at about 8%, and the target being 10%. You know, we are not overburdened with debt. Our Teachers Association and others have made sacrifices to help balance this budget. And I think supporting the tax increase of 3.1% is the responsible thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Are there any other board members that would like to, oh, Mr. Salomon, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks again. I'm not there yet, but I do want to say, Bill, a lot of what I saw tonight is kind of what I asked about last week. Using additional fund balance, getting creative, definitely putting the transportation part on hold to look at to ensure that we get that right. Obviously, that savings of 1.2 or whatever it was is very intriguing, but I want to make sure that's run and done well for the kids. Safety has got to be at the forefront of those decisions. So a lot of what I saw tonight is what I talked about last week. I appreciate the work that went into this. The feedback from the community, the folks that I talked to are blown away at your presentations, that you put that much work into it and you get it to a point that they understand. Part of what our problems are sometimes is we're not transparent enough. And that forum last week hit a lot of people, did a lot of notes for a lot of people, and brought them right up to where we see and what we talk about almost daily anymore. So I applaud it. I need a little more time. But again, great work again, Bill. Every time you do something, it's good stuff. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salomon. Mr. Hidalgo, I believe your hand is up.
Yeah, Bill, thank you so much. Really, I have to just piggyback off of the emphasizing the quality of your presentations is fantastic. And I was apparent when I first met you that you had these type of skills. So I'm glad we have you. One thing that stands out to me is the tax increase history chart, how you put that line chart with the bar charts under and the gaps, showing the gaps in the tax increases, where we basically based our expenditures, we tend to base our expenditures on the Act 1 index, and it may have gotten a little away from us, in years past. And so I think I juxtapose that to talking with constituents about don't raise my taxes. When you knock on 1,200 doors and the seniors are all saying, don't raise your taxes. It's a tough one, but I know that we kind of are behind the 8 ball when it comes to revenue and expenditures. So I think getting this, it's not a bad idea to do this one time over the Act 1 index to try to play catch up. And then really in the next couple of years, we're gonna have some hard decisions to make. So I'll be supporting a tax increase. Not sure where I stand on the budget at this point, because obviously it's not everything that I would like to see, but as Dr. Thora would say, you can't win them all. And I really do applaud every single contribution and sacrifice that's gone into this budget. But I don't really think it's a balanced budget if we're using $3 million of fund balance, but also maybe that's the discussion I'd like to hear. We usually come in and put that money back, right? And hopefully revenue will come in better as expected as usual.
Yeah, so this year is a bit different. We have historically had a budget deficit, but that was the assumptions that were in that budget were during a full employment economy and a non-pandemic expenditure world. So this deficit feels different to me. I am more concerned about using fund balance than I was last year when I recommended even a higher amount to be used. We have to take steps during the budget process or the purchasing process this year to make sure that expenditures fall in line with what we have budgeted, that we're closely monitoring our revenue collections, and that we're able to adapt quickly without having to make any drastic mid-year changes. So we will be very carefully monitoring spending and revenue during the year to make sure that that the $3 million doesn't become something larger and more difficult to counteract in future years.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your work on this. Appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Are there any other board comments or questions, indications of where you are on the budget? Mr. Bialik, do you have anything that you would like to say? I see that your hand is raised.
I'm trying to click there. Okay. You're just not going to let me go without saying anything. Well, this is really difficult. So I've said to, I think, every one of my fellow board members, and probably publicly, that I just don't see how we can raise taxes on our neighbors on a difficult time, in a difficult year like this, when we have folks who are out of work getting 50% pay cuts, 20% pay cuts, or whatever the case may be. But the truth of the matter is, we just have no choice. There's absolutely no choice. And in fact, I think that we have no choice but to go up to the full amount with the exceptions. Because if we don't, we're just we're setting the district up for even more escalated problems in the future, which are coming very quickly, potentially, as it is. So that's really unfortunate. I hate to be in this position, but I just don't see another way around it. I think, though, we have to get to a place where we're at a zero deficit budgeting process. So we can no longer, and really we couldn't before, we've been very, very lucky over the past decade, and certainly for my time in the board here, that we project deficits every year, as Mr. Hidalgo had said. We project these deficits every year, and then we end up with more revenue than we expect. I don't think we can expect that going forward. We may have a time where our economy recovers completely and we're back on the road that we've been on over the past decade or so, but that may be 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And we can't plan for that. And we have to keep Council Rock viable. So I'm hoping that we can start having that discussion very, very soon. I'm disappointed that we couldn't have it this year as we had liked to, or at least I had liked to. But we have more tax increases coming. They have to come. The concern is that we're going to have probably much lower Act 1 index levels. And many people, if you're listening to this and you know me, you're probably very, very surprised to hear me saying this, but we don't have any choice and we have to take things up to the max. And I think we're going to have a serious conversation very soon about a referendum for next year. Mr. Stone put out the amount of tax increases that we're going to have to keep the funding that we need in the district. And I think next year was 8%. And we can't do that without the community behind us. So, Bill, great work as always. Everyone, great work as always. But it's a terrible time, and it's unfortunate that we have to do this. But I'm a yes for this tax increase.
Thank you, Mr. Bialik. And I just wanted to add that, a lot of the points that Mr. Bialik just made, I agree with. I think everyone would like to consider a lower increase rate, but unfortunately, we're just in a very unusual situation with this unusual budget, and it's really an unprecedented time. And so I think, I am supportive of this budget, but I also think that next year we are going to have to look at some other areas, and that it would, really be helpful, I think, if the Finance Committee and others are looking at those budgetary areas, and instead of waiting until certain milestones, to do some of the work that Mr. Stone does so well, that we're really checking in, every month, and we're really looking at our budget and examining the ways in the future that we may be able to make further reductions, because in all likelihood, that's where we're going to be headed. And so I just wanted to agree with Mr. Bialik and others, and that's, I guess, my comment for tonight. I believe that Mr. Block has his hand up, so I'm going to turn this over to him now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marcel. And for polling purposes, it looks like, Bill, this is the budget to bring to the meeting next week. I'll also be supporting it. I completely agree with my peers. Taking a tax increase in this environment is a really tough thing to do, but our job is to ensure that the school district is sustainable, as it means so many things to the community. It educates our kids. It's a place to get together. But more importantly, it's what brings people to the area, which dictates our home values. And it's incumbent upon us to do the things that we need to do to be sustainable. It's been wonderful to see all of the different parts of the district pulling together to contribute to giving us a little bit of understanding of what the next 2 years will look like in some times that are very unknown. So I certainly appreciate our staff concessions, all the work that the teams have done around the budget. And you know, the big surprise for me, frankly, when states around the country are cutting budgets by 15 to 25%, you know, Pennsylvania is going to be in a tough spot. And I was frankly shocked that they funded education at last year's level. And that's what, you know, was a real surprise and really helpful. So, you know, all that being said, we know a lot more than we did a couple of weeks ago. There's also still a lot that we don't know. And that, to me, is why it's important to take the full 3.1, because it'll help keep us sustained over time in the places we don't know. I'm also comfortable with the use of fund balance. I'm comfortable with the appropriations that the team is recommending. I'm really pleased to see the earmark for the COVID contingencies. I think it's really important for the task force that Dr. Frazier's put together to take a look at any scenario for which we could have to open up under in the fall, because, you know, right now we just don't know what that looks like, but we've got a plan for it. I also think after we get into school in the fall and understand where we are, we really need to address the future. You know, Mark talked about the referendum, and that might be a part of the discussion down the road. But what I'd really like to see is, you know, we've talked about costs outstripping our ability to raise revenues. And, you know, if you don't do anything, you know, we've shown our fund balance going negative. People have asked what happens when it goes negative. Well, it simply can't. It's not allowed to. We take mitigation steps. So I think what would be really helpful, especially, you know, to board members who might be on the fence about this budget, is to know that the administration has already started to suggest some ideas about what those mitigation ideas could look like. And I would love for Ms. Marcel and Mr. Bialik to initiate, along with Mr. Stone, some real serious conversations around what the specifics of mitigation could look like, as you know, part of after we get back to school and deal with COVID-19 and the reality of next year. Let's start talking about that going into the budget cycle. So well out in front of starting the budget cycle in January. But this was one of the toughest budget cycles I've watched us go through. But it's also one of the easiest decisions that I've had to make on a budget. So as I pull the board here, Mr. Stone, Dr. Frazier, this looks like your budget to bring next year. I know Ms. Brooks hasn't had a chance to comment, but thank you for the work on probably the most important thing that we do in these trying times.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Ms. Brooks, do you have any comments to add?
Sure. I mean, I could just add in that I do support this budget. And what I particularly appreciate is that, you know, it has evolved in a way that makes it more palatable. I mean, I think that what Mr. Bialik said is true. I mean, we're faced with the reality. We don't really have a choice. But that being said, we don't have a choice necessarily in understanding the need for to raise taxes, but we do have a choice to understand how that gets put into the budget. And the excellent process that we were able to go through, thanks to the hard work of you know, our administration and the board and all the feedback we got from the community, helped us to get to something that is the most palatable situation in a, you know, a bitter pill to swallow. So I just want to thank Dr. Frazier and Mr. Stone, our committee chairs, for all the hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Mr. Bialik, your hand is up again. Do you have additional comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Andy's comments. So, Andy, I appreciate the comments you made. I am concerned about waiting. So I don't want to wait to get the work done on the budgetary items that we need to address, including do we have a referendum? Don't we have a referendum? What items do we have to consider reducing, cutting, however you want to say it? We have to, you know, almost immediately come up with option 1, 2, and 3, depending on how things are going to potentially play out. So we have momentum around this. I don't want to suddenly be in January, November, whatever the case may be. We have the Financial Advisory Committee. I think Mr. Stone had already suggested that we engage them in this process. So my only pushback on, Andy, your comments is I don't want the board starting to think that we should wait. I think Kristen and I are ready to roll up our sleeves, continue to have our sleeves rolled up with Mr. Stone and Dr. Frazier, and we shouldn't hesitate on this. This is vitally important.
Yeah, Mark, I think you misinterpreted my comment. I wasn't suggesting we wait until December. I was just suggesting we let the administration get through the start of school or to the start of school, because that's going to be really important to do that. Now, if there is a capacity outside of that, I certainly don't want to hold anything up, but I'm just trying to recognize the amount of work that this administration has got to do. I think the potentially the Financial Advisory Committee is a good place to get some early thinking. But again, I want to be cognizant of not stretching our administration to a point where they can't be effective in the things that they need to do. So I don't disagree with what you're saying in principle, but I'll defer the administration.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. It looks like all of the board comment has finished, unless anyone has anything additional that they want to say. Mr. Stone, is there anything you would like to close us out with?
I really appreciate the team and the assistance that they've provided, cabinet members, Mrs. Rubanich, the assistant business manager, the business office staff. It's really, I'm just the person delivering the message here. There's a lot of people doing the work behind the scenes. So a lot of credit due to them. Thank you for the support. It certainly was a difficult process. There's no doubt about that. And we'll hope that the sun starts to shine very soon.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. We hope so too.
Job well done. Ms. O'Grady, I know that you have been tracking public comment. Much of that public comment was relative to the Education Committee presentation this evening. Clearly, we will not be proceeding with that elementary schedule change. So I would ask that we hold off given the hour, and the board has received that public comment. However, I do think we have at least one public comment that came in that was non-Education Committee related. Is that correct?
Yes, there's one public comment that's related to facilities.
Okay, if you would, please.
Certainly. This was submitted by Ellen, forgive me for the pronunciation, Rawicks of Holland. She says, first, thank you for all the hard work that's this spring during these unprecedented times. I do understand the budgetary issues that we are facing and the likely impact that we will have on the planned renovations to Hillcrest and Richborough Elementary schools. As you know, these will be the only two schools without air conditioning. I'm not sure I understand why Rolling Hills was renovated before these schools, as they had AC already. I would like to encourage the board to strongly consider a solution to provide AC for these schools if the renovations are put off indefinitely. As Dr. Frazier himself has said at meetings I've attended on the hot, humid days that we have in both fall and spring, it is difficult or impossible for teachers to teach effectively and for students to learn effectively. Can the electric system be updated to support air conditioning? While the renovations would certainly be nice, air conditioning is really a necessity. And that is all the public comment we have.
All right, thanks, Ms. O'Grady. And just one point of clarification there, Soul Finestone Elementary also does not currently have air conditioning, and we have officially suspended that particular project. We have not yet suspended either of the two projects that were just referenced, just simply because we haven't gotten to the point where we need to borrow those funds yet. So we all empathize with the air conditioning issue without a doubt. I have certainly beat that drum loud and long about wanting to have all schools air conditioned by the summer of 2023. Due to the economic climate that we're in, we're not going to be able to hit that target, but certainly keeping that as a foremost priority and looking forward to reaching that just as soon as is possible. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to the board. Thanks to the cabinet team here. Thanks to Mr. McClay and Mr. Harlan for presenting earlier, and to everyone who has tuned in here this evening. Just a reminder that we do have a board business meeting 1 week from tonight, and that will include our final budget approval by the board. So with that, have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, thank you.